Somewhere within a castle, a fierce clash unfolded as swords met in a relentless exchange. It was a battle between a hero and a demoness. Both were confused by what was happening. For the hero, the situation felt strange, while for the demoness, it was difficult to accept. Neither of them could understand why their weapons failed to break against each other. Each had believed that their own weapon was the most powerful. As they both stepped back, each carried the same question in mind. At the same time, they sought to ask it. The question was identical for both.
Who forged your sword?
When their attention shifted to the pommels of their weapons, where a marking had been carved, silence followed. The demoness came to a realization, recognizing the work of a stubborn blacksmith. The hero also understood, letting out a quiet breath as he reached the same conclusion. From the flow of their battle, the hero had come to understand that their strength was evenly matched. Continuing the fight with those weapons would not lead to a conclusion. The demoness reached the same understanding. There was no point in continuing the battle, and in that moment, they found rare agreement. For their generation, a truce became the only reasonable choice. It carried a quiet irony, as their decision was influenced by not wanting to provoke the blacksmith behind those blades. The demoness considered that the blacksmith may have already foreseen such an outcome, and that underestimating him would be a mistake. The hero accepted that thought, and with that they parted ways. All of this came to pass because of a single figure, a legendary blacksmith. Yet before these events, that same individual had once lost his life. It began on the day he stepped forward to save a cat from an oncoming truck. That moment marked his end in his previous life, driven by nothing more than his fondness for cats. When he opened his eyes, he found himself floating. A voice reached him, asking if he was awake, noting that his soul appeared undamaged. Izo questioned who she was, and the girl explained that, simply put, he had died in that world. Izo recalled saving the cat. Looking at his hand, he came to the realization that he was dead, and he found himself wondering why he felt so calm. The girl explained that, under normal circumstances, his soul would have been broken down and stored as a new resource. However, she had placed that process on hold and slowed his spirit so the shock would not shatter his soul. She had witnessed him saving the stray cat before his death, and Izo acknowledged it. She then revealed that the cat had been her. The realization caught him off guard. She described herself as a watchdog, someone who moved between worlds with the role of observing them to ensure they did not negatively affect one another. In his world, she had taken the form of a cat to act as a lookout. She admitted that she had made a mistake and nearly died, but Izo had saved her. Izo considered this and thought it sounded like she held a high-ranking role, yet he questioned whether being hit by a truck would have truly killed her. The girl clarified that only her temporary body would die, and that loss would be temporary, having no real impact on the world itself. However, she explained that there was now a disturbance because Izo had died when he was not supposed to. To correct this, it had been decided that she would compensate him with another existence. Izo admitted he did not fully understand how it worked and wondered if it would be possible to simply erase the accident instead of going through something so complicated. The girl explained that such a solution would have been the simplest, but the problem was that she had already observed the event. What she had seen would be reported and recorded, making it impossible to undo. She apologized and stated that Izo's death could not be reversed. Izo came to understand that there was nothing more she could do. The girl then mentioned that a similar incident had occurred in another world. As a solution, she would exchange their existences, placing the other being in Izo's world, and Izo in theirs. The idea surprised him, leading him to question whether that meant he would live as someone else. She acknowledged his understanding. Izo then settled on one remaining question, wondering why she was going out of her way to keep him alive. The girl admitted that she had made a mistake, and that Izo had saved her. Because of that, she would feel uneasy if he were truly gone. She then explained that there was another reason as well. As a way to show her sincerity, or rather her gratitude, she decided to grant him a cheat for the world he would be sent to. Izo found himself wondering about this cheat. The girl clarified that it would be something like special knowledge or an ability that would make living in that world easier. Along with that, she would also prepare a house for him. She then asked what kind of life he ideally wanted. Izo reflected on his past. He had lived without family, completely on his own, spending his days working in a sweatshop-like company as a programmer. Before he even realized it, he had grown old, his hair turning gray. The only person who might notice his absence would be his boss, and even then, a replacement would be found quickly. As his thoughts moved, he realized there was nothing left tying him down. Still, he did not want to simply disappear. This felt like a second chance. He thought that it would be nice to make a living by creating things, since that had always been his hobby. The girl accepted this without hesitation, stating that it could be arranged. Izo then added that, although it had been accidental, he liked cats to the point that he would risk his life to save them. If possible, he wanted to live a slow and peaceful life surrounded by cats. The girl then asked what exactly he wanted to create. He considered it and realized he had always been interested in swordsmithing, though he had never been given the chance to pursue it. She agreed to this as well and granted him the experience and ability of a blacksmith. In addition, she included knowledge of language, general understanding of the world, some combat capability, and a small amount of magical power. A burst of light enveloped Izo, and in the next moment he was cast downward. He woke up in the middle of a forest. As he slowly sat up, pain spread through his entire body, accompanied by a splitting headache. Then a strange sensation suddenly stirred within his mind. Izo questioned what was happening to his head, his body, even his fingertips, as unfamiliar information began pouring into them. It became clear to him that this was the moment it truly settled in. His old life was completely over. He felt that things had begun to stabilize. Testing himself, he opened and closed his hand. His body now felt rebuilt, filled with unknown knowledge and experiences that were not originally his. The sensation was strange, almost like something had been installed into him. Nearby, he noticed a house. He recalled that the girl had mentioned preparing one for him. He approached it, opened the door, and stepped inside. Looking around, he observed a kitchen, a bedroom, ingredients, and various tools. Everything necessary for daily living seemed to be in place. He figured these supplies would last him for some time. However, there was no electricity, no running water, and no well, leading him to realize he would need to find a water source. Then he noticed another room nearby. Upon entering, he was taken aback. It was clearly a workspace, and all the materials and tools were already prepared. He picked up a hammer, and his hands and fingers moved with natural familiarity, as if they already understood how and when to use it. The realization came to him clearly.
I know it.
He understood now that this was the so-called cheat, along with the ability to use a small amount of magic. Soon after, hunger set in. Judging by the light, he assumed it was around noon and decided to sort out something for lunch. After eating, he planned to explore outside and search for a water source. He began preparing ingredients in the kitchen and got the fire ready. As he looked at his hand, he noticed with surprise that he could produce a small flame. It was too weak to sustain for long or reach high temperatures, but it was enough for ignition. With that done, he prepared to head outside in search of water. As he wandered through the forest, he spotted a green squirrel, a clear reminder that he was no longer in his original world. He wondered what kind of forest this was and how vast it might be. He questioned whether there were any towns or villages nearby, realizing he had not been given much information about such things. In the end, he acknowledged that aside from his abilities, he knew almost nothing about this world. As he continued walking, he came across an herb and recognized it as a medicinal plant. He realized that knowing this must be part of the essential knowledge given to him, though it still felt strange to understand something he had never actually learned. He picked several of the herbs. At the same time, he noticed that both his mind and body were slowly adjusting to this new world. He walked farther and judged that the distance from the house was about 15 minutes on foot, which seemed like a reasonable daily exercise. Soon he found a source of fresh water. Looking at his reflection, he observed that his appearance had changed. The girl had made him slightly younger, just as he had requested, leaving him looking around 30 years old. He noticed fish in the water and realized that fishing was also an option. Not long after, he heard a rustling sound nearby. He wondered what it could be, sensing that something might be lying there. When he moved closer to check, he found a woman lying unconscious. As he approached and examined her condition, he saw that she was bleeding. Turning her over, he noticed a tail, which left him uncertain whether she was a person, a tiger, or some kind of beast woman. He understood that she would not survive unless he brought her back to his home immediately, so he carried her. As he did, her body reacted with pain, but he pressed on, knowing there was no time to waste. Back at the house, Izo located sewing tools. The only thing he still needed was cloth. He tore some fabric and used it to prepare bandages. Then he boiled water to sterilize a needle. He laid the woman on the bed and began examining her injuries. As expected, the most serious wound was the one on her stomach. Thanks to the knowledge he had been given, he knew exactly what needed to be done. Enduring the installation had proven useful. He used the sterilized needle and thread to stitch the wound. As he worked, the woman reacted to the sharp pain, but he continued carefully until it was done. After finishing, he fed her an herb. Afterward, her condition appeared to stabilize. He reflected that he had somehow managed to carry out first aid despite being only an amateur. He understood that if the wound left a scar, all he could do was accept it and feel apologetic. Izo considered the need for disinfection and reducing fever, and he was relieved that the herbs he had gathered earlier turned out to be useful. Fatigue soon caught up with him, and it became clear to him that this was now the world he would be living in. He began thinking about preparing for life as a blacksmith. There were still many things left to do, but since this was his second chance, he wanted to live at a slower and more relaxed pace instead of returning to a life of constant overwork. He figured that it might be best to start working the next day while continuing to check on her condition from time to time. He also realized that falling asleep would not be ideal, yet his exhaustion took over. He lowered his head onto the bed and drifted off. After some time passed, the woman climbed on top of him, marking the beginning of the next chapter of his life. The tiger woman suddenly grabbed his neck, and Izo quickly realized that there was no strength behind her grip. It became clear that she was not trying to kill him. He checked on the wound on her stomach. As her mood shifted, he remained calm. She indicated that it still hurt, though it was healing, which brought him a sense of relief. She then turned her attention to whether he had seen her body. Izo understood that he had no choice but to examine it in order to treat her properly, and he made it clear through his actions that he had not done anything beyond what was necessary. She leaned in and sniffed him, then held back, deciding to trust him for the moment, sensing no sign of deceit from him. Izo found himself unsure of what that meant, while she associated it with the way one's heartbeat reveals their state. He felt relieved that the situation did not turn awkward. He handed her some clothes and urged her to put them on. He explained that her previous clothes had been heavily soaked in blood, leaving him no choice but to cut them apart during treatment. Izo felt uncertain about their value to her and expressed a quiet apology, recognizing that he might not have understood how important they were. She accepted this without concern, regarding them as nothing more than worn-out rags. She then looked around and questioned whether this place belonged to him, which he confirmed. When she asked what he did there, Izo thought of calling himself a blacksmith, though in truth he had only settled there the day before. She observed him carefully and sensed no dishonesty, yet she noted that she did not recall there being a house in this part of the forest. Izo clarified that the house had already been there when he arrived. She considered this and mentioned that she rarely came to this side of the Black Forest, so it was possible she had simply overlooked it. The mention of the Black Forest stirred faint knowledge within him, something that had come from the installed information. He understood that this area lay to the east of the forest. She explained that she usually stayed around the northern or western parts, but the previous day, while resting in this area, she had encountered a large black bear. From there, everything had unfolded as it did. In the end, she recognized that if Izo had not found her, she would have been killed by it. Izo felt a sense of fear upon hearing about the dangerous creature in the forest. He realized how fortunate he had been not to encounter it the previous day. With that in mind, he wondered how long it would take for her injuries to fully heal. From what he understood, beastmen possessed bodies far stronger than those of humans. Even so, in her current state, hunting or exploring would be impossible for about 2 weeks. Izo then considered the idea of her staying in his house. The suggestion caught her off guard. He had only just arrived in this place and was already thinking of finding someone to assist with housework and blacksmithing. In exchange, he would provide shelter and food until she recovered, which seemed like a fair arrangement. She remained silent for a moment, thinking it over, before eventually accepting. Since he did not give off any suspicious feeling, she decided to stay until her injuries healed and she could move normally again. What would come after that could be decided later. Izo accepted that and felt there was no need to rush the matter. She showed a faint smile, settling into the idea that she would be under his care for the time being. He then asked for her name, and she revealed it to be Samiya. To him, it sounded like a good name, though she personally did not like it, finding it lacking strength or charm. She would have preferred something that sounded stronger. Izo compared it to something like Gonzalez, which immediately made her burst into laughter, finding it strange and unexpected. Izo grew slightly irritated, yet he still believed that a name given by one's family naturally suited the person who carried it. That thought amused her, and the mood lightened for a moment. Izo then gave his own name as Izo Tanya. From what he understood, people like him, with similar features, were usually from the northern regions of this world. Samiya found it unusual, as family names were rare, and such names were often tied to status or ownership of land. Starting a smithy in this way did not quite match that image. Still, Izo felt that it would be fine as long as she accepted things as they were. He preferred that she simply call him by his name, and she agreed to do so. After some time, Izo prepared to begin his work. He felt that the preparations were sufficient and decided to start by making a small knife. First, he lit a fire in the firebed. Then, he maintained the temperature until the charcoal was properly ignited. Using wind magic, he controlled the airflow to keep the ventilation steady, much like operating bellows. Since the fire was not too strong, he could manage it on his own, though the heat was still more intense than he expected. Once the temperature rose above 800 degrees Celsius, the steel began to change color, signaling that it was ready to be forged. Izo understood the process from the knowledge given to him, but this was his first time actually doing it. Thanks to the cheat, he could instantly recognize when the iron had reached the right condition. Even so, he found himself surprised, questioning whether this was truly his own ability. The strength behind each strike of the hammer felt unfamiliar. He recalled carrying Samiya back to the house and fetching water earlier. Even when he was in his 30s before, he had never possessed this kind of strength. It became clear to him that his body had grown stronger. He planned to begin his afternoon work after Samiya had eaten lunch and was resting. Moving on to the final steps, he shaped the iron, reheated it, and then cooled it. After that, he quenched it in water to strengthen the metal. He polished the blade with a file and finished by sharpening it on a whetstone. Step by step, Izo relied on the knowledge installed within him, turning it into real experience through his actions. His movements gradually aligned with the skills he had been given, guiding his body toward true mastery, which reflected clearly in the sharp form of the blade. After some time, the knife was complete. It was his very first creation. He then wondered what he should use it on and chose a bundle of vegetables. As he cut through them, he was taken aback. The blade sliced cleanly, even cutting into the board beneath. He was astonished by how sharp it was. None of the knives in the house compared to this. He began to question whether this was truly the effect of the cheat. A blade that cut this easily felt almost unnatural and dangerously effective. He thought it might be best to use it for self-defense and at least add a proper handle to it. It seemed clear to Izo that relying too much on the cheat caused the knife to become excessively sharp. A blade like that would be far too dangerous to sell in any market. With that in mind, he decided that the next day he would create 3 more knives, one sharper than the first, another slightly less sharp, and a final one that would be only barely sharp. He planned to have Samiya test them first before deciding what to do. At that moment, she was still asleep. Izo gently woke her, letting her know that dinner was ready. She stirred, feeling that no matter how much she rested, it never seemed enough. Izo checked on her condition, noting that her wounds still required care and that she should avoid moving too much in order to recover her strength. As she noticed the object in his hand, she wondered if it was some form of magic, though he regarded it as something simple. He handed her the meal, knowing that while rest was important, proper food was just as necessary. She accepted it without hesitation. The dish consisted of simmered meat and vegetables. Izo was not particularly skilled at cooking, and this was about as much as he could manage. Even in this new world, he understood that he would need money to purchase food, firewood, and materials for his blacksmith work. By the next day, the knives were finally complete. He called Samiya over to assist him. She agreed, though she was unsure how much help she could offer when it came to blacksmithing. Izo only needed her to test how well the knives could cut. He indicated the first one for her to try. She picked it up and began slicing vegetables. The moment the blade passed through, she was clearly impressed. Izo then directed her to try the next knife. She used it in the same way, cutting cleanly once again, and found herself even more surprised. From behind, Izo observed that the second knife made cutting easier. The difference caught her off guard, as the blade seemed to cut far too smoothly. He then guided her to try the last knife, the one he considered most important. She prepared herself and made the cut. The result left her visibly shaken by how effortlessly it sliced. Izo then had her try pulling it out. Samiya reacted in confusion, unable to immediately understand what had just happened. Izo quickly told her to calm down, realizing that holding a knife in that state was dangerous. She apologized, and Izo brushed it off, acknowledging that he had not explained things properly beforehand. This confirmed his thoughts. The cheat he had been given allowed him to perform at the level of a first-class blacksmith. He began considering that if he wanted to sell his work, he would need to think carefully about how to present and handle his products. Samiya then showed interest in the knife, finding it useful for hunting. Izo saw no issue with it and was willing to let her have it. Her reaction was immediate and bright, clearly pleased with the idea. Izo did not make much of it and assured her it was fine. He also planned to make a sheath for the knife, though it would take some time. With that settled, she returned to bed to continue resting. From this point, Izo began to form a clear plan for what to do next. By adjusting the quality, he could produce more knives at a level suitable for selling. Based on Samiya's reaction, he had a good sense of what standard would work. His first step would be to create more knives and farming tools, then sell them to support himself. He had heard that beyond the forest there was a town with a lively market on weekends. With that in mind, his blacksmithing life began. After changing the bandage on her wound, Samiya showed clear gratitude. Izo checked on her condition, and she indicated that while she was not ready to go hunting yet, she was feeling better than before. Izo then suggested that they head to town that day. It had already been a week since he started making knives, and he had also tried crafting a few other tools. With enough items prepared, they were now on their way to sell them. The standard version of his knife, which he referred to as Model Number 1, could be produced in large numbers since it was quick to make. By this point, Samiya had nearly fully recovered. They had even begun taking walks together, during which she shared knowledge about the forest and its ecology. Izo found it useful to combine that with the knowledge he had been given, allowing him to better understand what was around him. He had been concerned about encountering dangerous creatures like wolves or wild boars, but nothing had appeared. Samiya believed it was because Izo gave off a strong presence, which kept such threats away. Still, Izo found it difficult to fully accept that, considering she was the stronger one between them. In his thoughts, he remained aware that even if he did not fully understand the limits of his abilities, there were surely creatures in the forest that were far more dangerous than him. It took about 2 hours of walking through the forest to reach the main road, and another hour from there to arrive at the town. It likely helped that Samiya was a beastman, as they encountered neither dangerous creatures nor bandits along the way. After some time, Samiya pointed out the town ahead. Just outside the walls lay the marketplace they were heading toward. The idea of starting a small business outside the town walls felt exciting to Izo. He realized that setting up there meant he would not have to worry about entrance or exit tolls. As they approached, a man nearby called out to them. When they turned, they saw that it was a guard. He approached and questioned them. Izo responded with a composed expression shaped by years of experience in dealing with people. The guard noted that he had not seen them around before and asked about their purpose. Izo presented himself as a blacksmith who intended to sell knives at the market. The guard then asked to inspect one. Izo allowed it without hesitation, and after examining the blade, the guard found no issues. With that, Izo and Samiya continued on, reminded by the guard to avoid causing any trouble. At the market entrance, they paid a silver coin and received a stand along with a permit to sell. The location of the stalls was assigned on a first-come, first-served basis. As they walked through the market, Izo noticed that all the good spots had already been taken. Samiya pointed out another location, suggesting they try there instead. After setting up, Izo felt that everything was finally in place, while Samiya noted that it turned out to be a decent spot. Izo relied on her for support that day, and she responded with a gentle smile. 2 hours passed, yet nothing had been sold. Izo tried calling people over and even demonstrated the products, but it did not lead to any results. In his thoughts, he realized that his background as a programmer had not prepared him for selling goods. A familiar voice approached, asking how things were going. It was the guard from earlier. Izo acknowledged the situation, seeing the humor in his inability to make a sale. The guard then showed interest in buying a knife. This caught Izo off guard. The guard explained that he had been impressed with the knives earlier, and since his own had been damaged, he wanted a replacement. Izo accepted this and handed him a knife. The guard examined it and appeared satisfied, then asked about the price. Izo stated that it would be 5 silver coins. The guard found the price surprisingly low and questioned if it was truly appropriate. Izo had already discussed pricing with Samiya and concluded that setting it too high might cause problems. The guard paid the 5 silver coins, and Izo expressed his gratitude. It was the first time he had earned money from something he created himself. Before leaving, the guard mentioned that if the blade performed well, he would recommend it to his colleagues. Izo was confident in the quality of his work. The guard then departed. Samiya observed him and wondered if he felt satisfied, and Izo responded with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Another hour passed, making it 3 hours in total, yet no additional customers appeared. Izo began to think that perhaps the people there did not have much need for farm tools. He decided that they should pack up and return home. Just as they were about to leave, a voice called out, asking if they were already closing. When they turned, they saw a group of guards approaching. Izo found it strange, as they had not caused any trouble. An older guard stepped forward and confirmed whether this was Izo's stall and if he had been the one who sold a knife to a guard named Marius. Izo clarified that it must have been the younger guard from earlier, which seems to confirm the situation. The older guard showed clear interest and asked if there were still knives available. Izo was surprised but presented his remaining stock. Without hesitation, the guard decided to purchase all of them. The sudden decision left Izo stunned. The other guards explained that Marius had been proudly showing off his new knife during their break, which led them to come and see it for themselves. They wanted blades of the same quality. Izo calculated the total for the 8 knives, which came to 40 silver coins. The guards were impressed by how sharp the blades were and completed the purchase. Later, as they made their way back through the forest, Samiya felt relieved that they had managed to sell everything. Izo agreed and thanked her for helping that day. With all their stock sold, he realized it would take some time before he could produce enough to restock again. At this point, Izo felt confident that he could handle more than just simple repairs and small orders. He decided that his next goal would be to forge a longsword. He also considered that, if he could eventually strike a deal with a traveling merchant, he would be able to expand the variety of goods he could offer. He understood that it was important to personally test the farm tools and axes he created. At the same time, he realized that he should prepare a separate room for Samiya as well. Inside the house, Samiya showed interest in whether he could make arrowheads. Izo understood that she wanted them for hunting once she had fully recovered. The idea of using equipment similar to what he made seemed appealing to her. Izo accepted this and decided that he would make them for her, which clearly pleased her. After some time, Izo focused on continuing his knife production for the day, planning to move on to making arrowheads afterward. He began by preparing molds using wood and clay, then poured heated steel into them and waited for it to cool. He had Samiya assist by sharpening the blades and attaching them to handles once they were ready. At the same time, Izo worked on crafting a large saw for cutting wood and began modifying the axe he had previously tried to sell. Carving the teeth of the saw required patience, and it took him the entire day to complete. The next day, Izo stood outside, facing a tree. He raised the axe and delivered a single strong swing. To his surprise, the tree let out a creaking sound, and then half of it collapsed with that one strike. Both he and Samiya were left in disbelief. As Izo looked at the axe in his hand, he could not help but question its power, realizing that if he was not careful, this new life could end just as quickly as his previous one. Afterward, they prepared the fallen tree, cutting it into smaller sections using the axe. Izo called out to Samiya, reminding her not to overexert herself since she had not fully recovered yet, and they continued working together. They then used the large saw, pulling it back and forth between them to cut through the wood. As they worked, Izo found the resistance strangely soft, almost like cutting through something much easier than expected. Samiya noticed the unusual feeling as well, finding it oddly amusing. Izo reminded her to be careful, as the strain was causing her body to tremble. Once they finished, Izo observed that the work had gone smoothly. At that pace, he believed they would be able to complete everything by the end of the day. Samiya observed that work like this would normally take far more time, yet with Izo's tools, everything moved much faster. She recognized how remarkable his equipment was. Izo understood that the ability to create such tools came from the knowledge that had been placed within him. It was simply the cheat given to him for his second life. Even so, he did not want to rely solely on that advantage. He wanted to grow through his own efforts rather than depend entirely on what he had been granted. Still, he remained grateful for the opportunity to begin with such gifts. In his mind, he saw himself as nothing more than a visitor in this world. Because of that, he resolved to use his abilities properly, living a steady life and making sure not to misuse the power he had been given. That night, Samiya noticed that Izo was still working. She approached him, drawing his attention. Her thoughts turned to something he had mentioned before, that he had not originally lived here. Izo had acknowledged that earlier, and now she wondered if he planned to stay in this place moving forward. From what she could see, he had already made up his mind. She reflected on everything that had happened since coming here. Even though she had not been able to do much because of her injury, she had still found enjoyment in helping him with his work. Their conversations during meals had been engaging, and their walks together had been something she looked forward to. More than anything, she found herself drawn to watching him work, seeing the focus he had when creating something with his hands. With all of that in mind, she wondered if it would be acceptable for them to continue living together. Izo had already decided to remain in this place, and with that decision came the question of whether she was comfortable staying as well. Her reaction made it clear that she was more than willing, her excitement showing through as she expressed her gratitude. Afterward, Izo finished his work for the night and handed her the arrowheads she had requested. Little by little, Izo began to carve out his own place in this world. Through each small decision he made, both now and in the future, he continued to shape the life he was building. He hoped that this would be the beginning of many calm and satisfying moments ahead. Meanwhile, inside a bar in town, a man spoke with satisfaction about purchasing a knife from Izo. His companion wondered when Izo would return, thinking of buying one for himself next time. Not far from them, a woman overheard the conversation. Curious, she stepped forward and approached them, asking to see the knife they were discussing. Izo handed Samiya a lunchbox filled with bread and dried meat. He reminded her that she had only just recovered, so if she encountered any danger, she should return immediately. She understood and set off, while Izo watched her leave and wished for her safety. After that, Izo returned to his work. His first priority was to build up his inventory. From that day onward, he planned to expand beyond knives and begin forging longswords as well. He checked the mold he had prepared earlier to see if it had dried properly. Once confirmed, he split it in half and removed the inner mold. Then he reassembled the two outer pieces and placed them into a barrel filled with sand. After that, he poured in the molten iron. Once the metal had cooled, he removed the clay and took out the sword. He then filed down the rough edges and used a hammer to shape the blade further while it was still hot. After tempering the metal, he sharpened the blade. For the finishing touches, he added a guard and wrapped the grip in leather. Though simple, he also crafted a wooden scabbard to complete it. Normally, this kind of work would require multiple people working in sequence, but thanks to the cheat given to him by the watchcat, he was able to handle much of the process alone within his workshop. Izo carefully carved his signature design into the pommel of the sword, and with that final touch, the piece was complete. The design was modeled after a cute cat he had once seen on social media. With that, the first stage of his longsword was complete. From there, he planned to spend the next few days producing lower-ranked, more standard models of swords and knives in larger quantities. Even though these were his own creations, he continued refining them with care. At one point, Izo found himself holding the sword and striking a pose like a hero. Just then, Samiya returned home. Seeing him in that moment left him slightly embarrassed, and he chose not to explain what he had been doing, simply acknowledging her return. She appeared a bit flushed, and Izo noticed it. There was a light sense of happiness in her expression. He realized that having someone waiting at home created a different kind of comfort. Samiya shared that same feeling. It was a kind of happiness Izo had never experienced in his previous life. He then asked about her outing. Samiya had successfully hunted a tree deer. She had already prepared it by removing the insides and leaving it in the lake so they could retrieve it the next morning. Izo understood and then turned his attention to how the knife and arrows had performed. Samiya found the weapons to be very effective. The next morning, she and Izo brought back the tree deer she had hunted and began cutting it up. With her skill in handling the knife, combined with the blade's sharpness, they were able to remove the skin almost instantly and move on to slicing the meat into portions. Once all the meat had been cut, Izo noticed that the knife's sharpness made the process almost too easy. As they continued, the pieces of meat began to resemble the kind he was familiar with. Izo reflected on how, in his previous world, the sweetness of fruits and the ease of eating prepared meat were all the result of people's efforts behind the scenes. While they cooked some of the meat, Izo wondered what had been done with the organs that were removed from the deer. From what Samiya explained, leaving the remains in the forest would naturally draw wolves to consume them. Izo understood this as returning what was left back to the forest. As he ate, he found himself appreciating the taste. It had been a long time since he had eaten fresh meat that felt this satisfying. Samiya then thought ahead to the next hunt, considering that catching a bird would be a good idea, especially since roasted leaf birds were known to taste good. The thought appealed to Izo. Seeing her reaction, he felt that eating well was an important part of living a slow and steady life. After some time, they brought the remaining meat into the workshop and prepared it to be preserved as dried meat. Izo also began thinking about making smoked meat in the near future. The following morning, since Samiya was taking a break from hunting, Izo had her assist him with his work. She began shaping a mold and found the process surprisingly interesting. With her help, Izo was able to build up enough stock once again to take to town. As they approached the town, they were greeted by Marius, who had not seen them for a while and had been concerned. From what Izo understood, the earlier demand had led to his stock running out completely. Marius noticed that Izo had brought swords this time. Another man nearby showed interest and mentioned that he might return later to take a closer look. While setting up his stall, Izo acknowledged the neighboring vendor, recognizing that they would be working side by side for the day. The man accepted this without issue. Izo then asked Samiya to make use of the time to buy groceries, specifically salt and barley. She agreed and left to take care of it. With everything prepared, Izo finished setting up his stall and settled into selling at a steady, unhurried pace. After some time, a man approached Izo and showed interest in the swords. Izo handed one over, and the man drew it from its sheath before carefully examining it. After inspecting the blade, the man recognized its good quality. He then decided to purchase 4 swords. The request surprised Izo, and he found himself questioning whether the man was certain. The man explained that he was a peddler. He only intended to keep one for himself, while the rest would be taken elsewhere and sold. Izo understood the situation and began to see the opportunity in it. In his thoughts, he realized that this could become a way to expand his business beyond the town by letting others sell his work in different places. The transaction was completed, and Izo reflected on the idea of traveling merchants. The thought crossed his mind that, once he had saved enough money, it might be nice to travel together with Samiya someday. Not long after, Marius arrived with several of his companions. With their purchases, Izo managed to sell out all of his ordinary model longswords. The only items left were the higher class models that he had not yet displayed. When Samiya returned, Izo let her know that the knives had already been sold. As they spoke, Samiya noticed someone nearby looking around. The figure stood out, a dwarf, which she found unusual to see in that area. Izo recognized the mention of dwarves from his knowledge, recalling that they were a smaller race. Samiya reflected that they were rarely seen there. Even for her, most encounters had only been brief, usually when she met them in the forest and guided them toward the main road. Before long, the dwarf noticed both of them and made his way over. His attention focused on Izo, as he sought to confirm whether Izo was the one responsible for making the knives used by the guards. Izo confirmed that he was indeed the one who had made the knives. The dwarf then noticed a knife displayed on the table and showed interest in it. Izo allowed her to take a closer look. She drew the knife and tested it, carefully observing its qualities. After that, she wanted to see the finest item he had in stock. Compared to the mass-produced ordinary models, which were made in larger numbers, the high-class model had been set aside. Izo had intentionally kept it hidden, intending to sell it only to someone he considered worthy. The dwarf, confident that something better existed after examining the knife, waited expectantly. Izo then revealed the sword and offered it for inspection. The moment she saw it, she was visibly taken aback. She carefully wiped the blade with a cloth, bringing out its shine. Despite her small frame, Her movements were precise and steady, showing a high level of familiarity with handling such items. She continued examining every detail, testing the sword thoroughly, while Izo and Samiya simply observed her without interrupting. As time passed, it became clear that she had been inspecting it for quite a while. Other customers came and went, yet she remained focused on the blade. Izo began to wonder how long it would take before she finished. Eventually, she returned the sword. Izo's reaction showed a hint of disappointment, as he had expected her to purchase it. Still, he accepted it back without issue. Then, instead of leaving, the dwarf made an unexpected request. Izo found himself confused as she stepped forward and drew attention from those nearby. Without hesitation, she knelt down and asked to become his disciple. The sight of her kneeling left Izo completely taken aback. A few moments later, Izo, Samiya, and the dwarf sat down together. The dwarf introduced herself as Riku Moritz, expressing that it was a pleasure to meet them. Before Izo had any chance to refuse, she had already prostrated herself in the middle of a crowded street. To properly hear her explanation, they decided to clean up and move to a quieter place. It was also necessary, as Izo did not want Samiya drawing unnecessary attention from the public. Samiya found the name unusual and wondered if it was a family name. From what was explained, Moritz was not a family name but the name of the smithy she belonged to. Among dwarves, it was common for them to gather with different families and form a smithy, introducing themselves by the name of that workshop. In that sense, she was known as Riku Moritz of the Moritz Smithy, which Izo came to understand. Izo then shared their own names, including Samiya, who greeted her in return. Riku considered his background and noted that he seemed to be from the north. Izo acknowledged that it was more or less true, though due to certain circumstances, he was now working as a blacksmith within the Black Forest. Riku reflected on this, thinking back to why she had never encountered a blacksmith of his level before arriving here. From that, she concluded that his origin explained it. Izo then sought to understand what she truly meant by wanting to become his apprentice. From what was explained, dwarves commonly leave their home smithy for several years to train. Riku, along with her brothers, had also set out from their workshop for that purpose. As part of that journey, they would travel from place to place, visiting different smithies to learn and refine their skills. They would become apprentices under skilled blacksmiths, improving their techniques over time. Eventually, they would return to their original workshop, bringing back new knowledge and creations. After that, they would once again travel back to the place where they had trained. This cycle was part of the dwarven way of life. Izo questioned whether they were not concerned about their techniques being passed on. From what Riku explained, for a smithy, having a dwarf become an apprentice elsewhere was considered an honor. The growth of that dwarf, along with the knowledge and techniques they brought back, would ultimately benefit the smithy itself. Riku then took out a knife. She recalled that a few days earlier, when she had just arrived in the city, she came across that very knife being used by the guards. Izo recognized it as one of the blades he had forged. That connection confirmed everything for her. Since Izo was not affiliated with the city's official blacksmiths and only sold his work in the open market, Riku had instructed her brothers to continue ahead while she remained behind, waiting for him to return. Izo then thought about her brothers, and it became clear that they had already moved on in search of their own smithies to train under. He considered what it would mean if he refused her request. From what was understood, she would simply continue on her own to find another master. The thought of a young girl traveling alone through uncertain paths lingered in his mind, highlighting the risks involved. Nearby, Samiya quietly observed Riku without saying anything. Izo found himself conflicted, recognizing a certain naivete in the situation. In the end, he decided to accept her as his apprentice. Samiya, however, clearly did not share the same agreement with that decision. Even so, Izo set conditions before allowing it. There were 4 requirements that had to be accepted first. Riku showed no hesitation in agreeing to hear them. The first condition was clear: he would not tolerate any behavior that disregarded personal safety. From that moment on, such recklessness would not be allowed. Riku accepted this without resistance. The second condition was that there were not enough rooms, so renovations would be necessary. The third was that, aside from blacksmithing, she would also help with various chores. The fourth was that formal speech would no longer be needed. He would call her Riku, and she could simply call him Izo. Riku found that difficult to accept and instead chose to address him as her master. From her perspective, as an apprentice, it was only natural to show proper respect to the one teaching her. At that moment, Samiya burst into laughter, reacting to the situation in her own way while the others each processed it differently. After some time, they arrived at their destination. Izo pointed out that this place served as both their home and their workshop. Riku was clearly taken aback by the sight of it. Izo then checked on her condition, noting that her luggage looked heavy and that the forest path had not been easy to traverse. Despite that, Riku managed well, her sturdy body making the journey easier than expected. He instructed her to set down her belongings and clean herself up. At the same time, he expressed appreciation towards Samiya, recognizing that she had chosen a path through the forest that would be easier for Riku to walk. Samiya reluctantly acknowledged it. Later, the three of them sat down for dinner. Izo brought up the matter of space once again, pointing out that there was not enough room. For the time being, Riku and Samiya would share the bedroom. Riku hesitated at the arrangement, feeling that it might not be appropriate. Since she had brought camping equipment, she considered sleeping outside instead, leaving the bedroom for the others. Izo saw no issue, as he rarely used the bedroom himself, so nothing would really change for him. Riku found this unusual and began to question the situation, wondering about the nature of their living arrangement. The unexpected assumption led to a sudden reaction from both Izo and Samiya, who were clearly caught off guard. Samiya strongly rejected the idea, making it clear that their relationship was not what had been assumed. Riku reconsidered the situation, realizing that she had misunderstood. Meanwhile, Izo found himself confused by the idea, even questioning how such a relationship would work in this world. Izo concluded that there was nothing more to clarify, stating in his own way that there was nothing between him and Samiya, at least for the time being. The mention of "for now" caught Samiya off guard, leaving her slightly embarrassed. Izo noticed her reaction and checked on her condition. Riku viewed the situation differently, understanding it as a group living together like a family within the same workshop. The word "family" lingered in Izo's thoughts. With that idea in mind, he accepted it and lightly patted Samiya on the head. He then returned to the practical matters, explaining that until the house renovations were complete, the sleeping arrangements would remain as previously decided. As both the owner of the house and the one in charge, his decision would stand. The two of them accepted this. The following day, they began the renovation work. They polished the wood that had been prepared earlier while also digging holes to set the base for the pillars. Since Samiya had gone out hunting, the work was left to Izo and Riku. Even so, Riku was already accustomed to this kind of labor, likely from her time in a dwarven smithy. Combined with Izo's enhanced strength, their progress moved quickly. After some time, Samiya returned from her hunt. Izo welcomed her back and checked on how it went. She had managed to take down a large tree deer. Her attention then shifted to Riku, noticing her work. Riku had been organizing lumber, and in the process, she had used the axe to cut through wood with surprising ease, almost as if it were something much softer. The sharpness of the tool stood out to her. Samiya recognized the reaction, recalling that she had felt the same way the first time she saw it, finding it somewhat unusual. As Izo listened, he found it a bit strange that Samiya had described it that way before. Still, he moved on and explained that blacksmithing work would begin the next day, carried out alongside the ongoing renovations. Riku showed clear enthusiasm for the plan. Before the sun set, they prepared a mold for a less powerful type of blade, continuing their steady progress. The next morning, the three of them brought back the game Samiya had hunted and began butchering it. After taking a short rest, they moved on to blacksmithing. They poured the melted metal into the mold they had prepared the previous day. As expected, Riku quickly adapted, gaining experience as she worked. Her hands moved without hesitation, and her pace was both efficient and steady. After a light lunch break, they resumed their work in the afternoon, focusing on making knives. However, there was a problem. The techniques Izo used were based on the cheat he had received. Teaching something like that was not straightforward. Riku called out to him, and Izo decided to be honest. He admitted that this was his first time taking on an apprentice and that he did not know the proper way to teach. Riku understood immediately, accepting the idea of learning through observation. She focused completely, determined not to miss even the smallest detail of his movements. They began by working on a knife intended for mass production, something suitable for ordinary use. As Izo hammered the metal, Riku watched closely, studying each step. Once the blade was heated and placed into water, it let out a sharp sizzling sound. Izo explained that only sharpening and finishing the edge remained. He then turned to Riku, wondering if she had learned anything from watching him. Riku had already picked up on several things. She recognized that Izo seemed able to understand the state of the iron just by sound, yet at the same time he was not using his full strength. She also noticed that the longsword he had shown earlier was different from the knife he was making now. Izo clarified that this knife was meant for everyday use. He wanted her to focus on making something similar, which meant observing the process closely before attempting it herself. He then had her try making one. Riku began the process with precision. As Izo watched, he was surprised by how well she performed, especially considering she had only seen him work once. After some time, Riku finished her knife and handed it to him for inspection. Izo took it and carefully examined the result. Izo quietly reflected that the work in front of him was impressive. It was by no means inferior to the ordinary model he had created earlier. Still, he pointed out that although Riku had done well, there were moments where the sparks had been too intense. That alone showed there was still room for improvement. Even so, he was confident that with time, she would be able to forge something on the level of the longsword she had seen before. Riku felt encouraged by this and resolved to dedicate herself fully to improving her skills. Izo then decided that he would demonstrate the process once more, this time completing every step from start to finish so she could observe it clearly. Watching another person handle the iron for the first time made him realize something. Because of the cheat he possessed, he could naturally understand how to treat the metal, the timing of each step, where to strike, the temperature, and the hardness. Everything came to him instinctively, allowing him to forge with precision straight from his thoughts without losing quality. It was clear to him that this ability did not come from effort or training. In contrast, Riku and other craftsmen relied entirely on their own abilities, striving to master the craft through steady learning and experience. From the very beginning, they built their skills through apprenticeship and constant practice. Izo felt that it might be presumptuous to try teaching something he himself had never properly learned in the traditional way. Because of that, he chose to focus on letting her observe, understand, and take what she could from watching. Riku waited patiently as he worked. When he finished sharpening the knife, the process was complete, and he acknowledged her patience. Riku then examined the blade. From what she saw, it was far beyond ordinary craftsmanship. The level of skill displayed in the work stood out clearly, to the point that even among dwarves, it would be rare to find something made like this. Izo decided to give the knife to Riku. She was surprised by the gesture, unsure if it was truly acceptable. From his point of view, a blade of that level was not something he could easily sell, and now that she had become his apprentice, she was also part of the household. Riku accepted it with gratitude, resolving to continue learning and practicing so that she could one day reach the same level of craftsmanship. Izo responded in a casual manner, encouraging her to keep at it. Around that time, Samiya returned and mentioned that the meat processing and preparations for tanning had been completed. As she looked over, she noticed the knife in Riku's possession and was clearly surprised. It became apparent that Riku had received one as well. Later, they moved outside where food had been prepared, and the three of them ate together. During the meal, Riku became curious about Izo's abilities, wondering if he could use magic. It was understood that his magic was limited to simple uses. Samiya pointed out that being able to handle both blacksmithing and magic was impressive, and she also mentioned that Izo had a family name. Her attention then shifted toward him, waiting for him to reveal it. When it was shared, the name was Tanya. Riku repeated it to herself, and from that, she naturally began to associate herself with it. This caught Samiya off guard, as the connection formed too quickly. However, from Riku's perspective, it made perfect sense. As an apprentice, she now belonged to the same smithy, and taking on the name reflected that. In her understanding, being under Izo meant she would be known as Riku Tanya. Izo recognized her reasoning and accepted that she had come to that conclusion. Riku reflected that she had never introduced herself using a family name before. With that in mind, she considered that if it was necessary, the smithy could simply be named after Izo. Samiya quickly understood the idea and began associating herself with that name as well. Izo, on the other hand, found the situation a little embarrassing. The thought of others taking his name in that way felt unfamiliar to him. Samiya then pointed out that it would not be fair if only one of them used his name. She began considering whether her own name should change as well. Izo thought about it quietly, recalling that he had been the one who invited Samiya to live with him in the first place. In the end, he accepted it. If they were to consider themselves as family, then there was no real reason to object. Both Samiya and Riku reacted with clear happiness, and the matter settled naturally. For Izo, who had always seen himself as a temporary presence in this world, it was a small but meaningful change. Until now, he had only focused on his craft, without thinking about leaving anything of himself behind. Yet now, there was something more, something that would remain with him. At the same time, he could not ignore the realization that came from Riku's reaction to his work. The abilities granted to him by the cheat were not something ordinary in this world. Even in his previous life, the level of sharpness and cutting power he could now produce was far from common. In addition, Samiya became his disciple, and the group around him gradually grew. With Riku joining, bringing a serious attitude toward the work, and with Samiya offering her assistance, Izo gained more time to focus on crafting. As a result, the overall efficiency of the Izo workshop improved. Izo usually visited the free market of a nearby town once a week to sell his creations. During one of these visits, he noticed a familiar face among the crowd. Marius explained that lately, whenever people came asking about Izo's items, the number of inquiries had steadily increased. Izo understood that this rise in demand was largely due to the efforts of those around him who had been spreading word about his work. The peddler also indicated an intention to make a purchase later. Izo's products ranged from knives and longswords to spears, each categorized by their respective rank. First was the type he could produce in large quantities, designed as an all-purpose tool known as the general mode. It was reasonably priced, and its sharpness made it popular even among ordinary households. Next was a higher performance knife intended for those more experienced with handling sharp tools, referred to as the luxury model. It also maintained a reasonable price and was favored by skilled users. There was a sense that these could sell even more if Izo established a connection with a wholesaler. Beyond those, there existed another category. This one was not displayed at the storefront. Izo chose to offer it only after carefully judging the intentions of the buyer. Known as the superlative class mode, it was crafted using the full extent of the unique ability granted to him by Watchcat. Its performance exceeded normal limits and carried significant risk, making it unsuitable to hand over to just anyone. Meanwhile, Izo felt a quiet sense of concern as he thought about the possibility of not being able to sell his goods, uncertain of what he would do in that situation. After some time, Riku spoke to him, noting that everything had been sold out once again. Izo acknowledged this, recognizing that those who had purchased his items had likely been spreading word about them. Riku then raised the point that it might be time to restock their supply of iron, charcoal, and clay. Samiya followed by asking whether there was a supplier for these materials, and Izo confirmed that there was. The Watchcat had arranged both the house and the workshop, and although Izo had been provided with sufficient food and materials, their stock had gradually decreased as expected. Izo considered the idea of asking the peddler for assistance. As if on cue, the peddler arrived, noting that Izo was still present. The peddler had heard that Izo would be leaving for the day and had hurried over. Izo felt that the timing was just right. He expressed his appreciation, recognizing that the goods had sold out again, largely due to the peddler purchasing in large quantities. The peddler responded positively, noting that Izo's products had become popular among customers and expressing interest in buying more. Izo was taken by surprise, realizing that if he had known earlier, he could have brought the additional 10 items he had crafted during the night. The peddler observed that Izo was not only skilled as a craftsman but also showed a calculating side. Izo, in turn, reflected on how he consistently worked with iron while also giving proper attention to silver. The peddler found this fitting and revealed a new plan. He intended to establish a proper store in the city, rather than continuing to operate only within the free market. Izo acknowledged this development with approval. The peddler expressed gratitude and sought Izo's input. Up until now, he had dealt in a variety of goods due to his connections in different places. However, he now aimed to establish a store in this town, taking advantage of the fact that, within the walls of a new settlement, there were few restrictions on what could be sold. Izo found the proposal interesting. The peddler then suggested that the shop could handle the sale of the cutlery and weapons Izo produced. Izo questioned whether that arrangement would truly be acceptable. The peddler confirmed without hesitation, having already become familiar with the quality of Izo's longswords. Izo briefly considered whether the peddler had personally used them. He understood that income from the free market was unstable, and at the same time, more people were starting to seek out his products after seeing them in the hands of others. Izo then expressed that he had also been hoping to establish a deal with a wholesaler. He indicated that if the peddler was willing, he would entrust him with that role. The peddler responded with clear approval, expressing gratitude. He then introduced himself as Camillo and conveyed that it was a pleasure to meet Izo. Izo also gave his name and mentioned that, for certain reasons, he resided in the Black Forest. They then exchanged a firm handshake. Camillo showed visible surprise upon hearing this, noting that living in such a place was unusual. Considering Izo's abilities, he recognized that Izo could live elsewhere if he wished, and he observed that it was not uncommon for someone like him to be accompanied by a beastman and a dwarf. Izo then brought up the matter of timing, explaining that wholesale transactions would likely occur about once a week, and asked whether it would be acceptable to inform Camillo in advance if there were any delays. Camillo agreed to this arrangement. Soon after, Izo recalled another concern and raised it before finalizing the negotiation. He explained that he was running low on various materials and asked if there was a place that could supply what he needed. Camillo offered to handle the procurement on his behalf. Izo felt relieved, recognizing how much this would help, and entrusted the matter to him. Camillo clarified that the cost of the materials would be deducted from the price of Izo's goods, and Izo accepted the condition. They sealed the agreement with a fist bump. Izo felt a sense of satisfaction, having secured a reliable way to replenish their materials. Camillo then mentioned that the shop would open the following week and asked Izo to bring his goods when he arrived, before taking his leave. A week later, Riku, Samiya, and Izo stood in front of the shop, observing it with clear amazement. The building was large, enough to surprise even Samiya. As they stepped inside, they were met with a wide variety of goods. Izo found it impressive. Riku turned her attention towards some rare spices, while Samiya noticed an unusual scent lingering in the air. Displayed on the wall were a single knife, a dagger, and a sword. Seeing them presented that way gave a distinct impression of being properly put up for sale, something both Samiya and Izo recognized. Camillo soon noticed Izo's arrival and led them upstairs. After a short while, they were seated. Izo then informed him that he had brought knives, a longsword, and short swords for the day, and asked how many would be taken. Camillo accepted all of them without hesitation, which caught Izo off guard. He explained that sales had been going well. Izo acknowledged this, noting that the shop was quite large, and then wondered whether Camillo's name as a peddler had become widely known. Camillo attributed the success to selling goods without distinction, whether to ordinary townspeople, travelers, or professionals. That approach had led to the establishment of this larger store. Izo compared the setup to something like a supermarket. Camillo then brought up a new matter, mentioning a request for a custom-made sword crafted by Izo. He had been uncertain how to respond when the request first came. Izo considered the idea of taking custom orders. He understood that he wanted to be selective about who handled his work, yet he also realized that progress would not come if he refused such opportunities entirely. Camillo asked whether the request should be declined. Izo decided against that, making it clear that he simply wanted to choose the recipients more carefully. Camillo suggested that he could evaluate the requester's skill and personality before informing Izo. Izo found this acceptable. He then added a condition. The requester would need to come to his workshop personally. To reach it, they would have to pass through the Black Forest, a place where wolves roamed. Anyone capable of making that journey would prove their ability. Camillo acknowledged this requirement. As for judging personality, Izo chose to rely on Camillo's assessment. He provided the location of his workshop, instructing that it be shared only with those deemed worthy. Camillo agreed to the arrangement. Izo then turned to Samiya and Riku, offering a brief apology as he chose to proceed with this decision. Riku expressed that she had no objections to her master Izo's decision. Samiya shared the same view. Izo felt grateful for their support. Camillo simply responded with a quiet smile. Izo then asked about the materials, wanting to know if they had been secured. Camillo confirmed that he had prepared a good amount and guided them further inside. As they entered the warehouse, Izo noticed that it was just as large as the shop. Camillo indicated that this was the stock. Izo was clearly impressed, realizing that all of this had been gathered within a single week. With this quantity, he understood that their supplies would last for quite some time. Camillo assured him that with this amount, there would be no immediate concern about restocking. He then leaned closer and quietly mentioned the price. Izo reacted to how low it was. The cost came to about a quarter of the usual wholesale price. He questioned whether it was acceptable for Camillo to offer such a margin. Camillo maintained a calm expression, indicating that even at that rate, he was still making sufficient profit. Izo accepted this explanation and decided not to hold back. He then considered how to transport the materials, noting that the amount was something he could carry by hand, though it would still be more convenient with assistance. He asked whether Camillo dealt with carts. Camillo indicated that he did not, but mentioned that there was an unused cart he had been planning to discard. If repaired, it could still be used properly. Izo found this suitable and asked about the cost. Camillo offered it without charge. Izo was taken aback by this. Camillo explained that it had no use to him, and that showing consideration to a loyal customer was natural. Izo questioned whether it was truly acceptable and wondered what made him deserving of such treatment. There was a quiet thought about whether there might be more behind the gesture. Camillo clarified that Izo appeared to be a supplier with strong potential for the future. Having someone who could provide high-quality items at a reasonable price was valuable. He regarded the gesture as an investment of goodwill. Izo acknowledged this and expressed his gratitude for Camillo's help. Camillo accepted this without hesitation. After some time, all the materials had been loaded onto the cart, and they were ready to head home. Izo considered that it would be somewhat heavy to carry along the main road, but he believed it could still make it back as it was. Ruki agreed with that assessment. Izo then thought about improving the road a little more. Ruki reflected that doing so would make it easier for people who wished to request items to reach them. Izo found that reasoning sound. At that moment, something drew Samiya's attention. She recognized it as a sign from a forest wolf and suggested that they pause and wait for a while. Izo noted that it had been the same earlier that morning, sensing that the wolves seemed more restless than usual. Samiya understood the reason, recognizing that it was about the time when they would be having their young. She estimated that in another month, they would likely begin seeing wolf pups. Izo briefly imagined what those young wolves would look like. Ruki observed that the wolves in this forest were unexpectedly quiet and wondered whether they actually attacked people. Samiya explained that the forest had an abundance of prey such as tree deer and grass rabbits, so the wolves were not troubled when it came to finding food. She also noted that with both her and Izo present, stronger individuals were unlikely to be targeted. Izo understood that those with strength were rarely chosen as prey. Riku then considered what would happen to someone weaker if they were attacked, and she realized that wandering alone would be dangerous. Samiya made it clear that whenever Ruki left the house, it would be better to go together with either her or Izo. According to Samiya, the wolves of this forest were unusually intelligent. They showed a level of social behavior that differed from ordinary ground wolves. To survive in this environment, they had developed awareness and adaptability, possibly evolving their intelligence to match the richness of the forest. Samiya also mentioned that aside from wolves, there were occasional bandits. Even with her and Izo nearby, there were still dangerous individuals, so caution was necessary. She gently rubbed her stomach. At that moment, Izo recalled something troubling. The black bear that had once attacked Samiya was still somewhere within this forest. Even for someone like Samiya, a tiger beastman, encountering such a dangerous opponent could pose a serious threat. That thought lingered only briefly before his attention shifted. He heard a sound coming from nearby and instinctively tightened his grip on the cart. Heavy footsteps approached, growing louder with each moment. What emerged was a massive black bear, an overwhelming and unavoidable presence of the wild. Later, with their materials restocked, they began creating new products. As Izo inspected the results, he found that the outcome did not look bad to him. Riku observed that, even compared to the previous items, the new ones turned out well, recognizing that the materials they had obtained were of good quality. Izo accepted her judgment, trusting her assessment, and decided they should continue. They placed the ores acquired from Camillo's shop into a furnace powered by magic, which refined them into steel. This furnace produced almost no slag, and it did not wear down, allowing it to be used repeatedly. Its efficiency was remarkable. Riku remained impressed by how magic functioned in such processes. In principle, their workshop was meant to rely on manpower to carry out its operations. However, having access to a supplier like this felt almost like an advantage beyond normal means. Izo even felt that it was to the point where he could almost apologize to the artisans of this world. Still, he was genuinely grateful as it allowed them to craft detailed work even while operating deep within the forest. Several days passed. Izo recognized that they had reached their production quota, and with that completed, he could finally turn his attention to renovating the house. At that moment, Samiya called out to him. Izo turned his attention to her, sensing that she had something to show. She indicated that he should come along if he had finished for the day. When Samiya revealed the result, Izo was taken aback. The renovation of the house had already been completed. Even the roof had been finished, and the result appeared well done. Izo expressed his appreciation toward Riku, acknowledging their hard work. However, Riku directed the credit toward Samiya's efforts. Izo felt apologetic, realizing that he had not been able to contribute much to the house over the past week. During those days, while Izo had focused entirely on blacksmithing, the responsibility of renovating the house had been left to Samiya and Riku. Together, with Riku's experience and Samiya's steady effort, the renovation had progressed smoothly and reliably. Izo reflected that completing all of this with just the two of them must have been quite difficult. Riku considered that, compared to humans, they were naturally stronger. Izo expressed his gratitude to them once again. Izo then mentioned that he had asked Camillo to prepare bedding for them next time. After that, he planned for them to work on making the door, followed by the bed and necessary tools. Riku wondered whether they would actually install a door for the room. Izo confirmed that they would and sought agreement. Riku thought about how, in most cases, unless it was the home of a noble, only the guest room or the room of the head of the family and their spouse would have a door, with most families sharing a single room. Samiya admitted that she had no experience living in a proper house, so she could not compare. Izo quietly realized that he had been speaking based on the common sense of his original world. Even so, Izo decided that he wanted things arranged that way, with separate rooms for the pupil and for the family. Both Samiya and Riku accepted this idea. Samiya then asked whether Izo planned to go to the city. Izo decided not to go for that week. Riku recognized this as a day off and began to think about what they should do. Izo responded with a calm expression. Without noticing it himself, ever since Izo arrived in this world, he had not experienced a proper day of rest. In order to maintain a balance between work and life, they had been working without a fixed schedule, continuing their efforts every day. Fortunately, sales through Camillo's shop had been going well. While they had not saved a large amount, they had managed to set aside a small portion of their earnings. Because of this, Izo chose to take a step back and allow himself a proper rest for the week. As they walked, Samiya pointed out a spot ahead, suggesting it as a place to stop. Izo looked at it and found it suitable, deciding that they would settle there. After nearly an hour of walking from their home, they arrived at the upper stream of the river. It was the long-awaited slow life, the long-awaited day off. Izo intended to spend this time doing something he had always wanted. He crafted a simple fishing rod using natural materials. The thread they had brought from home, combined with a fishhook shaped from processed rivet, formed a handmade fishing rod. Izo lifted a rock, thinking there would likely be bait underneath. As expected, he found worms. Rumiya showed clear discomfort, while Samiya displayed excitement. Izo quietly reflected on how differently the two reacted, noticing how absorbed they were in the moment. They then began fishing. Izo guided Samiya to let the line out a little more. Izo allowed himself to simply enjoy the calm present. The weather felt pleasant. Coming from a demanding workplace where breaks were rare, he now found himself in a situation where he could eat properly and get enough rest. Even so, the habit of constantly working remained, and it felt as if he still pushed himself without realizing it, even in this world. Taking things slowly and relaxing like this made him wonder when he had last experienced such a moment. Not long after, something suddenly tugged at Samiya's rod. Izo instructed her to remain still for a moment longer, allowing the fish to properly take the bait. At the right timing, he gave the signal, and Samiya successfully caught a fish. Izo acknowledged her success. Ruki then directed that the fish be placed on the ground so they could remove the hook. As Izo watched the two of them, he quietly noticed that after spending time working together, Ruki had grown more comfortable speaking casually with Samiya. The two of them appeared to be enjoying themselves as they handled the fish Samiya had caught. Before long, it became midday. Samiya had caught one fish, Riku had caught two, and Izo had not caught any. Izo felt a quiet frustration as, on 3 attempts, he had only managed to pull up driftwood and leaves instead of fish. Samiya questioned whether he might be giving off too much killing intent. Izo did not immediately understand what she meant, and the confusion showed slightly on his face. Samiya pointed out that his expression appeared intimidating. She then explained that fish were still living creatures, and they remained cautious when they sensed the presence of something strong. Izo considered this but reminded himself that it was still the middle of the day, and there was no need to rush. Not long after, Samiya lay down and let out a yawn. Izo glanced at her, and soon Riku also rested, both of them falling asleep peacefully. Izo remained seated, reflecting that this moment was meant to be leisure on a day off, and there was no need to chase results. It was simply a time to ease his mind. After some time passed, Samiya woke again, letting out another yawn. She realized that she had not caught anything since earlier in the afternoon. She thought about how fishing was different from hunting. Unlike hunting, it did not allow for setting traps or constantly changing locations, which made it frustrating for her. Izo reflected on the idea of hunting. He then recalled that during hunting, Samiya would remove all the internal organs except for the heart. He wondered what became of that heart, since it was never brought back home. Samiya explained that she would bury the heart beneath the soil of the forest. Samiya explained that when a soul returns, the forest gives rise to new life. Izo understood from this that the heart represented the soul. She further noted that wolves and other animals would come to consume the parts that were not buried. Because of this, some would remain nearby, watching and waiting. Izo reflected on this custom of the beast men in the forest. He quietly wondered that when the time eventually came for him to meet his end in this land, whether his own soul, having come from another world, could also become part of this forest. After that, they moved to a different fishing spot, though it did not lead to catching more fish. The sun was beginning to set, and it seemed like it was time to give up. However, Samiya and Riku had already caught 3 fish earlier in the morning, which meant there would be 1 fish for each of them. Even so, Izo realized that he had not caught anything at all, despite this being a day meant for leisure. He began to feel that his dignity, both as the head of the household and as a master artisan, was on the line. He resolved that no matter what, he would catch at least 1 fish. Samiya noticed his determination and found it amusing, seeing how clearly it showed on his face. Izo questioned whether it was truly that obvious and felt a bit self-conscious. At that moment, Samiya sensed something approaching. Izo also noticed it and steadied himself. He focused, reminding himself to stay calm, knowing that acting hastily would only scare the fish away. With careful timing, he pulled the line and successfully caught one. Izo held up the fish, moving it slightly as a small smile appeared on his face, satisfied that he had finally caught one. Samiya found his reaction somewhat awkward, while Riku regarded it as a fine result. Although Izo had not caught much, the 3 of them had enjoyed their time and were able to relax. With that, their day off came to an end, and they prepared to return home. Izo thought about how they would return to work the next day, continuing with both their craft and the house renovation. However, the heavy feeling that usually came before the start of a new workday was no longer there. He found himself looking forward to resuming his life as a blacksmith. It became clear that Izo was genuinely content with the life he now lived in this new world. After some time, they returned home and held a small celebration. Izo acknowledged the efforts of both Samiya and Riku, recognizing the work they had done that day. With that progress, they could take a short rest before moving on to the next stage of expanding the house. Their home was beginning to take proper shape, and both Samiya and Riku felt a quiet sense of pride and excitement. Each of the newly built rooms had been fitted with a simple window and door. A mattress and a bed frame were also placed inside each room. Samiya and Riku now had rooms of their own. Izo adjusted his own space, turning the room he had been using for sleeping into a combined guest and study room. With this arrangement, they were now able to begin living in their individual rooms. Riku felt slightly uneasy, as it was her first time having a room of her own, something she was not yet accustomed to. Samiya, on the other hand, turned her thoughts toward planting seeds in the field. Izo considered this and planned to see if they could obtain seeds during their next visit to Camillo. Alongside the house expansion, they also began preparing the land beside the house for cultivation. At present, they relied on the forest for meat and nuts, but vegetables still had to be purchased. If possible, Izo wanted them to grow their own vegetables and move toward a more self-sufficient way of living. Izo reflected that the unsold practice hoes and sickles they had made would now be useful, as they could serve a proper purpose. Riku realized that this would be her first time preparing a field and recognized how knowledgeable Izo was. Samiya shared a similar impression, noting that Izo seemed to possess an unusual breadth of knowledge. Izo reacted to that remark, feeling that the description did not need that particular emphasis. Izo's understanding came from a combination of what he had learned in his previous world and the knowledge granted to him after being given a second chance at life. Considering that, it was not surprising that others might find it unusual. Even so, Izo understood that there had been many things he did not know in his former world as well. That night, as Izo prepared to sleep, a quiet thought crossed his mind. It had been quite some time since he had last slept in a proper bed. Ever since arriving in this world, he had been sleeping at his desk. It seemed that he had carried over his habits from his previous life, where resting at a desk had become normal. He could not tell whether that was a good or bad thing. On the outside, his body appeared to be that of a man around 30, yet internally he still carried the experience of someone in his 40s. He allowed himself the thought that taking it easy from time to time was acceptable. The next day, a woman approached their house. Samiya sensed her presence quickly and turned her attention toward the outside. Izo noticed and asked what had caught her attention. Samiya recognized that someone had arrived. A loud knock echoed at the door, accompanied by a voice stating that Camillo had sent her and that she wished to commission a sword. The force of the knock surprised Izo. He moved to respond while Samiya kept a knife ready in case anything went wrong. Izo proceeded to open the door. When the door opened, he welcomed the visitor. The woman asked if he was the blacksmith who supplied weapons to Camillo's store. She introduced herself as Helen. Izo noticed that her voice carried strongly. He confirmed his identity, recognizing her as his first customer, and invited her inside. They took their seats. Izo considered whether she had come alone, and she confirmed that she had. He then thought about the dangers of the forest, but she had not encountered any trouble. Helen explained that finding the place had been difficult, but she had followed the trail of smoke to reach it. She also observed that Izo's workshop had an interesting atmosphere. Izo reflected that the wolves tended to avoid those who possessed significant strength. From this, Izo understood that she had entered the forest and found the workshop on her own, successfully passing the condition he had set. With that, he accepted her request and prepared to craft a sword for her. He then considered what she required. Helen untied and presented her current sword, indicating that she worked as a mercenary. She sought something similar in form but with greater strength. Due to the nature of her work, she rarely had the opportunity to properly maintain her weapon on the battlefield. Even so, the difference between survival and defeat depended on how well one could use such a tool. Izo recognized the weapon as a pair of short swords. As he held them, he noticed numerous scratches and chipped edges, and his gaze lingered on their worn surface. What Izo created were tools meant for combat, true weapons. If he used his abilities to forge them, any opponent, regardless of size, would not stand a chance. That meant people would inevitably be harmed by something he had made. It was a reality he could neither ignore nor avoid. From now on, it was something he had to accept, even if he would never grow accustomed to it. Izo acknowledged that Helen's swords were well made, recognizing the skill of the one who crafted them. He considered showing them to his apprentice, Riku, and proceeded with that intention. Helen allowed it without concern, and Riku examined the blades closely. Riku concluded that they were indeed fine weapons. She understood that if Helen desired something superior, then entrusting the task to her master would be the only option. Helen responded with visible confidence, taking Riku's words seriously. Izo then turned his focus to understanding the intended purpose of the weapon, which momentarily caught Helen off guard. He wanted to know how the swords would be used, as it would guide his work before he began forging. Helen understood the importance of this and decided that rather than explaining, it would be better to demonstrate. They moved outside. Helen drew both swords and began to display her skill. Her movements were swift, controlled, and precise. Izo observed closely, noting her speed. He came to understand that one blade was used to control and pressure the opponent, while the other delivered the decisive strike. Even so, the speed of her movements remained striking. As he watched, Izo noticed something unusual and focused his attention on her condition. Helen realized that demonstrating alone made it more difficult. She then looked toward Izo, indicating that having a partner would allow for a better demonstration, which caught him off guard, along with Samiya. Izo considered that if Helen wanted to spar, Samiya, being a beastman, would be more accustomed to fighting than he was. However, Helen judged that Izo appeared stronger than Samiya. Samiya reacted with slight irritation at that impression, acknowledging that while it might hold some truth, it still did not sit well with her. Izo reflected that since arriving in this world, he had not taken part in any real combat. Even so, his body seemed to understand how to move, as if it had been shaped for fighting from the beginning. It was a sensation of instinctively grasping what to do, a result of the strength he possessed. Izo accepted the situation and prepared himself. He considered that Helen was only intending to demonstrate her skill and would not aim to seriously harm him. Stepping forward, Izo faced her directly while Samiya and Riku observed quietly. Izo braced himself, hoping the exchange would not be too intense, but Helen showed no hesitation. She moved first, closing the distance in an instant and striking. Izo managed to block the attack, and she immediately followed with a rapid series of strikes. He held his ground, deflecting each one. Helen then stepped back, and Izo responded with a counterattack, which she blocked. Her movements were so fast that Izo perceived them like flashes of lightning. He pushed forward, keeping up with her pace as best as he could. Even so, Izo understood that without the ability he possessed, he would not have been able to move or even perceive her attacks. He would have been overwhelmed instantly. Simply matching her movements already required his full focus. Helen then launched another attack from the side. Izo avoided the strike, though it came close enough to slice through a portion of his hair. Izo came to realize that Helen was no longer holding back and was aiming with real intent. She advanced again without hesitation. After some time, both of them were left catching their breath. Izo noted that he had managed to remain standing, while Helen acknowledged his strength. Izo felt a trace of frustration, recognizing that he had spent the entire exchange on the defensive, focusing only on evasion. Helen appeared amused, admitting that she had intended to end the match within the first few strikes. Few people were capable of facing her thunder sword directly, and she acknowledged that she had become slightly carried away before offering an apology. Izo took this in and felt that he now had a clearer understanding of what was needed. He estimated that he could complete the sword within 2 days and expected her to return after 3. Helen hesitated at the thought of leaving immediately. Izo considered her reaction, while Helen shifted her focus toward continuing the spar after a short rest. Izo understood that if things continued that way, he would not be able to work on the sword. Helen recognized the point and adjusted her approach, instead expressing interest in observing the forging process. Izo reminded himself that the work would take 2 days. Helen then suggested staying there during that time. Izo realized that he had already prepared a guest room with a bed. He glanced at Riku and Samiya before coming to a decision, allowing her to stay. Helen reacted with visible excitement, striking Izo lightly. In this way, Izo's smithy received its first customer. After the exchange with Helen, Izo turned his attention back to the remaining work for the day, intending to finish what was left. Samiya approached him and indicated that she had completed the burr removal. Izo acknowledged this and had her leave the pieces where they were. Samiya then moved on to tidying up and prepared to adjust her arrows. Izo called out to her, recognizing that she had improved in her work, and he expressed his appreciation. Samiya responded with a simple, satisfied gesture, her tail swaying lightly. Whenever she was not out hunting, Samiya assisted Izo in the workshop. Most of her tasks involved casting and removing burrs. She seemed to find her own enjoyment in the work, and Izo considered that it might be worthwhile to let her try using a hammer at times. Nearby, Helen observed them as they worked. After some time passed, Izo indicated that it was time for dinner. Helen recalled that on her way there, she had been surprised to see an unusually large deer. Samiya recognized it as a tree deer and understood that such creatures could be troublesome when angered. Helen took note of this. She also mentioned that, even from a distance, she had spotted a bear. Both Izo and Samiya reacted to that information. At the mention of the bear, Samiya instinctively held her stomach again. Izo quietly considered that the bear was still somewhere nearby. Helen noticed the shift and wondered what it meant. Izo explained that Samiya had once been attacked by a bear and had nearly lost her life. Helen reflected on this, believing that if her equipment had been in perfect condition, she might have been able to defeat such a creature. Izo cautioned against taking unnecessary risks, recognizing that the bear was dangerous even for someone like Samiya who was familiar with the forest. He made it clear that if anything were to happen, it would be difficult for them to face the outcome. Helen accepted this and understood the concern. After some time, Izo lightly struck his own face to regain focus. This was the first custom order for their workshop, and he resolved to put everything he had into it. Izo began by casting a magic spell. Helen plans to inspect the progress the following day. For now, she had gone into the forest with Samiya to explore and gather materials. As Izo recalled the way Helen had handled her swords earlier, he heated the iron and carefully hammered it, keeping the blade evenly thin while making the most of the materials available. Through the special vision granted to him, he could perceive the structure of the iron at a deeper level, almost like seeing its particles. As he continued hammering, removing irregularities and shaping the blade, the quality of the weapon steadily improved. Izo then decided to test its strength. He instructed Riku to bring an ordinary model short sword, and she complied. He drove the ordinary blade into a tree trunk to hold it steady, then struck it with the newly forged custom sword. The result confirmed his expectations. The durability was sound, and there was no visible damage on the new blade. Riku was impressed by the outcome. Izo then looked at the ordinary sword and realized that it was no longer suitable to be sold through wholesale. Riku considered that it could still be sold after some reworking or sharpening, but Izo chose otherwise. Even if the quality remained acceptable, he did not want to sell something that had been used for testing another weapon. Instead, he decided that it would be reworked and kept for use at home. Riku recognized this as part of his nature, seeing him as a craftsman who held firmly to his principles. Izo accepted that with a small sense of satisfaction. Though he could be seen as stubborn, it did not make him unreasonable. Even if his abilities were something granted to him, he intended to pour all his determination into his craft. In doing so, he felt that he was drawing closer to the kind of work he had long wanted to achieve, and that thought brought him a quiet sense of fulfillment. For the finishing touch, Izo carved a mark onto the pommel. With that, he recognized that the first sword was complete. Riku showed interest in examining it, and Izo allowed her to take it. Riku studied the sword closely, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Izo noticed that she examined it with such focus that nothing seems to escape her attention. He then wondered whether the blade met expectations. Riku concluded that this was not something achievable through ordinary, or even moderate, talent. She reflected on Izo's circumstances, acknowledging that regardless of the reason behind his departure, losing him had been a significant loss to the north. Izo considered this, questioning whether his skill truly reached that level. Riku remained certain in her judgment. Izo understood that the power within his hands was far from ordinary. It did not even feel entirely real. Through using this ability with clear intent, he had come to realize something. This time, he had worked with iron while focusing on durability, which meant the blade would not be capable of cleaving through something like a boulder. However, if he had focused on sharpness instead, such a feat might have been possible. That would have resulted in an unusually powerful weapon. If he were to use materials superior to iron, he began to wonder what kind of result he would achieve. By balancing durability and hardness, he could create a weapon that possessed both qualities. Izo had come to understand this clearly. In other words, if he acted without caution, he would not only influence the path of the user but might also place them in greater danger. If the weapons he created were to become something akin to strategic tools of power, then he would need to consider whether he truly had the resolve to bear that responsibility. Riku called out to her master, apologizing as she wondered if she had said something that caused offense. Izo reassured her that it was nothing, explaining that he had simply been thinking things through. Izo reflected that he should not let himself fall into negative thoughts over things that had not even happened yet. He understood that he would need to keep such concerns in mind when accepting requests, but for now, what mattered most was that he had created something that made Riku feel glad to be his apprentice. That alone was enough for the moment. Soon after, Samiya and Helen returned from their outing. They had gathered a good amount of materials. Among them were medicinal herbs that helped suppress festering, along with various bitter and sweet plants. Samiya noted that the wolves had been particularly restless that day. It seemed likely that this behavior was connected to the large black bear that Helen had seen. Izo considered this and acknowledged the situation before shifting focus to their meal. He directed a calm expression towards Samiya, and she responded with visible satisfaction. Izo quietly reflected on the presence of the bear. It was not only Samiya he needed to consider, but Riku as well. He understood that he would have to remain careful to keep them from getting involved in anything dangerous. The following day, Izo continued his work. He focused on forging the second blade for the special order, while Helen observed closely. As she watched, Helen noted how smoothly and quickly Izo worked. His movements appeared efficient and precise. Riku recognized this as expected, knowing that for Izo, working at such a pace was not difficult. When considering whether she could achieve the same, she understood that even dedicating her entire life to the craft might not be enough to reach his level. Helen took in this realization, while Riku remained firm in her belief of Izo's skill. Izo overheard their thoughts and felt a sense of appreciation, though at the same time, it was not entirely comfortable. He knew that much of his ability came from a power granted to him, and being praised so highly for it carried a certain weight. Helen recognized the blade as one that carried a lightning-like quality. Izo acknowledged this and confirmed that both swords were now complete, placing them carefully on the table. Helen showed clear excitement upon seeing the pair. She noticed the distinct presence of that lightning-like energy within them and appeared eager to test them immediately. However, Izo stopped her, noting that it was already late. He explained that she could try them the following day. He understood that he had taken longer than expected and had kept her waiting, so he asked her to look forward to tomorrow instead. Though she initially resisted, she eventually accepted it. Rather than continuing with the testing, Izo turned his attention to preparing dinner. Samiya, Helen, and Riku all responded with visible delight. Samiya quickly recognized the dish as tree deer steak. The meal impressed them. Helen realized that the raspberries they had gathered earlier were being used in the dish, something she had not expected. Riku also reflected that even in her previous home, she had never had food like this. Izo explained that since he had completed his first custom order, this meal served as a small celebration. Samiya acknowledged this and showed her appreciation, with Riku also expressing the same. Izo accepted their words and noted that Riku had supported him throughout the process. Helen reacted in her usual energetic way, offering her congratulations. Izo recognized that this moment had come about because of her request and expressed his gratitude. The following day, they moved outside as Helen prepared to test the swords. She found that the weapon fit comfortably in her hands. The excitement from the previous day had lingered, leaving her unable to rest properly. Izo observed as she began testing the blade, encouraging her to swing it. Helen moved swiftly, cutting through the air with precision and speed. Samiya and Riku watched in amazement. After testing the sword, Helen understood its quality, recognizing it as exceptional. She set the weapon down and moved quickly toward Izo. Caught off guard, Izo was suddenly pulled into an embrace. Helen expressed how glad she was to have chosen Izo for the task, and Izo felt relieved that she was satisfied with the result. Helen tightened her embrace around his neck, and Izo began to feel the strain from it. Izo then explained that while he had already tested the durability of the weapon, he would handle any repairs if something were to happen. He noted that she could either visit Camilo's shop or come directly to his home if needed. Their attention then turned to the matter of payment. Izo left the amount up to her, allowing her to decide what she believed it was worth. Helen found it difficult to determine its value. Izo clarified that it did not need to be exact and that she could simply follow whatever arrangement had been agreed upon through Camilo. Helen then offered what she had on hand, consisting of 2 gold coins and some silver coins. Izo accepted this without hesitation, and with that, the transaction was settled. Helen wondered if the amount was truly acceptable, recognizing that it was more than what she had paid for her previous weapons. Izo reassured himself that her former swords had also been well made and that this exchange was fair to him. Helen showed a satisfied expression, and after that, they exchanged a firm handshake. She then took her leave, offering a final gesture before departing. Izo reflected on her strength, recognizing her capability. Samiya noted how much effort it had taken for both her and Riku to separate Helen from Izo earlier, while Riku commented on how loud Helen had been. Izo responded with quiet amusement. After that, Izo returned his focus to their usual work. Riku decided to check the number of short swords and long swords they currently had, with Samiya assisting her. Then, 2 days later, a sudden turn of events arrived. The moment to confront the dangers of nature had finally come. One day, Samiya came running back at great speed, as if fleeing from something, and reached the house. Izo noticed that she had returned earlier than expected and sensed that something was wrong. Samiya's face clearly showed fear. She had encountered the large black bear. Izo checked on her condition, and Samiya confirmed that she was unharmed. She had escaped before having time to think, believing she had shaken it off. However, she also understood that bears had a strong sense of smell, and there was a chance it could still track her. Izo felt relieved that she was safe, but his thoughts quickly turned to what needed to be done. Samiya must have encountered the bear somewhere nearby. If it continued roaming freely, there was a risk of crossing paths with it again at any time. The possibility of Samiya or Riku being attacked weighed heavily on him before he pushed that thought aside. Izo made up his mind and prepared to head out. Samiya reacted immediately, trying to stop him. Izo took up a spear, judging it sufficient for the task. He intended to deal with the bear if he found it. Before leaving, he instructed Samiya to secure the doors of both the house and the workshop. Samiya insisted on going with him, but Izo refused. He understood that if the situation turned dangerous, he could not guarantee her safety. That thought left Samiya uneasy. Izo reassured her, believing in his own judgment. It was not a matter of doubting her skill with a bow, but rather a decision he chose to face alone. In his mind, he recalled the earlier exchange with Helen. During that moment, he had confirmed that his body would respond correctly in combat. Even when he had restrained himself from striking, the knowledge within him guided his movements as if his body already understood how to fight. Samiya remained unsettled, her body trembling slightly as she watched him prepare. Riku also shared the same concern, hoping for his safe return. Izo acknowledged both of them, but held on to the thought that he would not fall and leave them behind. With that resolve, Izo set out to confront the bear. Behind him, the house was secured, and Riku quietly prayed for his safety. Samiya looked at her and followed, joining in that silent hope. Meanwhile, in the rain-soaked forest, Izo moved forward with careful awareness, staying alert to every change around him. In his mind, he followed the direction where the sense of danger felt strongest. Normally, he would rely on Samiya to watch for threats, but facing something like a large black bear, his instincts, sharpened by the ability he carried, were reacting intensely. The rain worked in his favor. It dulled scents and masked sounds, making it harder for the bear to detect his presence. In that sense, the harsh weather became an advantage. Izo's eyes widened when he spotted something ahead, and at the same time, he let out a quiet breath. He recalled a moment from his previous world, when he had given up his life to save a cat. Now, he found himself standing here, preparing to kill a bear. His body had changed, but his inner self remained the same as it had been back then. The difference now was that he had something to protect. There had been a time when, trapped in the life of an overworked corporate employee, nothing had truly mattered to him. Now, he had a family, and there were people who valued what he created. His gaze sharpened as he steeled himself. He found the large black bear and brought his body into position. The bear stood before him, observing him closely. Its presence carried clear hostility. Izo prepared himself for the confrontation, facing it directly. The bear moved first, stepping toward him with heavy intent. Izo accepted what he had to do. There was no hatred toward the creature, but he understood that it had to be dealt with. The bear lunged forward and swung its massive claw. Izo avoided the strike, recognizing both its size and speed. Even a single glancing hit would be dangerous. As he evaded the attack, he shifted his footing to the side and drove his spear into the bear's body. Izo tensed when he realized that his strike had not taken effect as expected. The wound was too shallow. The bear roared in response, and as Izo watched, it swung its claw again. This time, the blow landed, sending him crashing into a nearby tree. He forced himself not to lose focus. This was not a place where he could fall. He quickly pushed himself back up, steadying his stance and gripping his spear tightly. As the bear closed the distance again, Izo seized the moment and drove his weapon toward its neck. The bear cried out in pain. Izo's expression sharpened further as he recognized the chance to end the fight. He committed himself fully, determined to survive in this world and protect what he now held dear. With that resolve, he thrust the spear deep into the bear's chest. The bear collapsed. Izo watched closely, noting that it no longer moved and showed no sign of breathing. He considered that the fight had ended. He pulled the spear free from its body. As he did, he recalled Samiya's earlier remark about how a clean cut could feel almost unnatural. Looking at the bear, he understood what she meant. After that, he lowered himself to sit and took a moment to rest. It had been his first battle where his life was truly at risk. Now that the danger had passed, he became aware of the trembling in his body. Although his ability had played a significant role, the outcome had been narrowly decided. He examined himself, noting the bruises and scratches he had sustained. Even so, he had managed to avoid any broken bones. Izo stood again, considering what to do next. He had taken a life with his own hands. To possible, he wanted to make use of it, to consume the meat and return the rest to the earth. However, he did not know whether it was safe to eat. In the end, he chose to carry it back. After some time, with the rain still falling, Izo lifted the bear onto his back. Even with his enhanced strength, its weight was immense. Still, he pressed on, noticing that the rain had begun to ease slightly. For Izo, returning home quickly was necessary before encountering any other threats such as wolves. He estimated that he had already covered about half the distance. He suddenly stopped. Something had caught his attention. In the next moment, someone grabbed his leg and pulled him, only for it to be Samiya, showing the more instinctive side of herself. Izo reassured her that he was safe and that the bear had already been dealt with. Samiya looked at him closely, wanting to be certain. She checked him again, making sure he was truly unharmed. Izo acknowledged that he had suffered some bruises and impacts but nothing severe, and that no bones were broken. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other before Samiya's emotions surfaced, and tears began to fall from her eyes. Izo was taken aback as she cried in relief, then held onto him tightly. He responded by gently patting her head. Nearby, Riku approached and hesitated, unsure if she was intruding on the moment. Izo made it clear that she was not. Riku then explained that Izo had taken longer than expected to return, and since Samiya believed he would have been back already if everything had gone well, they decided to go out and search for him. Izo recognized the danger in leaving the house under such conditions. Riku, however, understood that there was no stopping Samiya once she had made up her mind. She added that they had been tracking both Izo's scent and the bear's, and as both grew closer, they had prepared themselves for the worst, ready to confront whatever approached. While waiting in hiding, Riku had observed that Izo and the bear had appeared together, making it difficult to tell what had happened at first. Izo understood their actions and expressed his appreciation. Riku directed that gratitude towards Samiya instead. Still held close, Samiya received his thanks. By then, the weather had cleared. Izo suggested that they return home. After Samiya had settled down, the three of them worked together to carry the bear. Along the way, they decided to leave it near a lake for the time being and planned to return the next day to retrieve it. Once they returned home, the exhaustion hit Izo all at once. Riku decided to take care of preparing dinner while Izo went to rest in his room. When he removed his clothes, the number of bruises covering his body became clear. Samiya quickly came to check on him, concerned for his condition. Izo reassured her that he was fine. Samiya remained uncertain and continued to check on him. Izo explained that he simply needed to clean himself. The fatigue weighed heavily on him. He told Samiya to let him know once the bath was ready. As he waited, he leaned against her, and before long he had fallen asleep. Samiya was momentarily surprised, realizing that he had dozed off while resting on her. She steadied herself and gently patted his head. By the next morning, Izo felt a strange softness around him. As he woke, he quickly sat up, realizing that he had not cleaned himself the night before. He noticed that both his bed and his clothes had been changed. At that moment, Samiya entered the room, and the two acknowledged each other calmly. Izo understood that he had fallen asleep completely. Samiya confirmed that he had slept deeply. She explained that Riku had been concerned he might get sick if he remained unclean, so the two of them had taken care of wiping him down and putting him to bed. Riku then entered the room and saw that Izo was awake. Izo expressed his apology to both Samiya and Riku. Riku told him that his clothes had already been washed and that there was no need for him to worry about it. Riku began to mention something about Samiya calling out to him during the night, but Samiya quickly stopped her, not wanting it to be shared. Riku did not see any harm in it. Samiya then guided Riku out of the room and reminded Izo to come once breakfast was ready. Izo accepted this and prepared to follow. With that, another day began. A simple day filled with the usual routines. A quiet continuation of the life they had built for themselves. Somewhere inside a mansion, the name of the Black Forest came up. A young lady reacted to it, realizing she was being told to take refuge in that forest. The one she called Nichan confirmed it. There was a blacksmith living there. A letter had already been written to a peddler who knew the blacksmith's location. She only needed to carry that letter to the merchant, and he would guide her the rest of the way. He was confident that the blacksmith would treat her well. The young lady accepted the plan and prepared herself. Meanwhile, in a growing urban district, Izo was at Camilo's shop. The two discussed business as Camilo arranged to take several of Izo's goods for the time being. Even within his own household, Izo's products had built a strong reputation. However, another matter was on Izo's mind. He brought up the young guard who had once helped him when he was just starting out. He had heard that the man returned to the capital and had not come back since. Izo wanted to know if anything had happened. Camilo looked uneasy at the question and wondered why Izo wanted to know. Izo simply remembered the help he had received and wanted to repay that kindness someday. Since the guard had vanished recently, he suspected something was wrong. Camilo acknowledged the concern and thought for a moment. Then he revealed that there had been growing talk of war among the high-ranking nobles in the capital. It might have something to do with that. Izo could only stare blankly after hearing it. Camilo then advised that it was better not to know too much about such matters, for Izo's own sake. Izo accepted the warning and thanked him. Later, Izo, Samiya, and Riku began the trip home, carrying materials in their cart. At the same time, elsewhere on the road, a young lady was running from pursuers. She glanced behind her and realized that at this rate, they would catch her before she could reach town. From a distance, Samiya's ears twitched sharply. She had already picked up the sound of hurried footsteps. Izo immediately turned to her, wondering if it was bandits. Samiya could not be certain, but from what she heard, people were already fighting. Izo made a quick decision. He told Samiya to go ahead first and find out what was happening. Whether it was bandits or wolves no longer mattered. Samiya obeyed at once and sprinted toward the noise. Izo called after her, telling her they would follow soon and to retreat immediately if things became too dangerous. Then Izo urged Riku forward, and she answered without hesitation. Not long after, they reached the scene. A group of men were clashing swords against a young lady and Samiya. Izo quickly drew his short sword and decided to leave their luggage behind. There was no time to hesitate. He rushed straight toward the fight and charged into the scene, anger rising at what he was seeing. One of the attackers noticed him approaching and immediately swung his blade. However, Izo reacted just as fast, blocking the strike with his own sword. He then forced the man backward to create space and followed with a slash across the body. But then another attacker, a bald man, came at Izo from behind. Samiya caught it first and called out a warning. Izo heard her in time. Tightening his grip, he turned and met the heavy blow head-on. The clash ended in an instant when the attacker's sword shattered from the impact. Without wasting the opening, Izo struck back and drove his blade into the man's chest. Seeing this, another one of the men chose survival over battle and tried to flee. However, he did not make it far. An arrow struck his neck mid-run. The shot came cleanly from Samiya. Even Izo was briefly stunned by how quickly it happened. He looked around and checked whether anyone remained. From what Samiya confirmed, that was all of them. The young lady they had rescued sat quietly, watching the aftermath in silence. Izo then turned to her. He knew it would not be easy to speak after such an event, but they needed to understand who she was and why she had been attacked. Too many men had fallen there, and the guards would certainly demand an explanation later. He asked her to see it as a way of returning the help they had given. As he looked at her more carefully, her face felt strangely familiar. Something about her reminded him of an actress from his previous world. The young lady first expressed gratitude for being saved. She then introduced herself as Diana Amal. Because of certain circumstances, she had come from the capital to live with a particular person. Diana then explained what had happened. While traveling, she had been attacked by those men. As she spoke, her hands tightened together, realizing what might have happened to her if Izo and the others had not arrived in time. Izo quietly reflected on the fact that she carried a family name that usually meant status, a noble from the capital. His thoughts immediately turned to the conflict Camillo had mentioned earlier. Could she be connected to it? He glanced towards Samiya. She simply gave a small nod. To him, that was enough to understand she sensed no lie in Diana's words. Izo accepted the situation and turned to the next problem. Bodies now lay around them, and time was running short. Before long, a guard patrol would surely pass through. The question was simple: hide or report everything. Diana chose hiding. Izo studied her reaction and questioned whether she was certain. She remained firm. Those men had already been pursuing her, and if they vanished here, it would create delay before anyone understood they had been defeated. Izo quickly grasped the real meaning behind that answer. It would also give her time to reach the place of that certain person. Diana confirmed it without hesitation. Izo knew there was no clean way to step back anymore. They were already involved. With that settled, he decided they would move the bodies into the forest. He had Riku pull the cart forward, and she accepted immediately. He then called for Samiya to help him with the rest, and she joined without question. Later, they dragged the bodies away one by one. During that grim work, a thought settled heavily in Izo's mind. For the first time, he truly understood what the things he created could be used for. He did not know whose fault any of this was. He could not judge whether blame belonged to the young woman or the men who chased her. However, one truth was clear to him in that moment: he had chosen to protect his family. Because of that, he felt neither regret nor hesitation over what he had done. He stood silent for a brief moment, looking at the fallen men. Samiya noticed and checked on him, wondering if he had been hurt. Izo assured her he was fine and thanked her concern. Then, without lingering any longer, he decided they would return home. Izo then asked Diana if she could explain more about the certain person she had been searching for. If they understood the situation better, they might be able to help her. Diana accepted that and began sharing what she knew. From what her brother had told her, the man lived in a remote area. Izo caught one detail immediately. She had a brother. Diana continued, explaining that the man had only recently started living there. Izo quietly took that in. She then added something more important. The man was said to be a highly skilled blacksmith. Her brother's sword and knife had both been made by him, and once matters settled down, her brother had planned to visit again for adjustments. At that moment, everything connected in Izo's mind. No wonder her face had seemed familiar. He remembered the guard who had helped him before, Marius. Izo carefully asked another question. He wanted to know whether her brother was named Marius and worked as a guard in the town beyond this area. Diana was visibly surprised. She confirmed that her brother was Marius Albert Amal and immediately wondered how Izo knew him. That answer settled it. In simple terms, the certain person her brother had trusted, the blacksmith in the Black Forest, was Izo himself. He admitted that he did know Marius. Then he explained that the person her brother had spoken of was most likely him. The revelation clearly startled Diana. Izo understood why. It was not the kind of thing someone would believe instantly. Later, the four of them continued walking together. Diana had originally been carrying a letter from her brother addressed to Camillo. The plan had been simple. She would seek out the one man who knew Izo's location and ask for guidance to reach him. Instead, fate had brought her directly to the destination first. As Izo thought about it, Marius had intended to entrust his younger sister to the stubborn man living inside the feared Black Forest, the place most people avoided. That alone told Izo that Diana must have been carrying troubles far heavier than she had revealed so far. Diana then asked for his name. Izo introduced himself and also introduced the others beside him, Samiya the beast woman and Riku the dwarf. Izo judged that they still had a little time before trouble reached them. The guards would likely discover the scene soon enough, so for now, the safest choice was to return to his home first. Diana accepted that and placed herself in their care. After some time, they arrived. Izo decided they should put away their luggage first and then eat. Thanks to Samia's alert senses and constant watchfulness, they did not run into any pursuers on the road back. The guest room might have been modest and somewhat cramped for a noble young lady, however, Diana seems to settle into it without complaint. Later, the smell and sight of the food being prepared clearly lifted her spirits. Izo quietly wondered whether someone raised in noble life would enjoy such ordinary meals. Still, he hoped she would. The moment Diana tasted it, her eyes widened in surprise. She found it genuinely delicious. Izo, Samiya, and Riku all looked toward her reaction at once. Realizing the attention on her, Diana became slightly embarrassed. She explained through her manner that she had not eaten anything since breakfast and had simply been very hungry. Riku did not mind at all. If anything, she seemed pleased that Diana enjoyed the meal. Diana also made it clear that formal treatment was unnecessary. Izo then reflected that appreciating good food mattered more than status. Even in difficult times, if someone could still enjoy a proper meal, they would manage somehow. As Diana thanked everyone for accepting her so suddenly despite arriving without warning, Izo quietly studied her condition. She had been chased, nearly killed, and forced to rely on strangers in an unfamiliar place. Yet if she could still notice flavor, still respond honestly to warmth and food, then she was holding together better than expected. After dinner, the mood became more serious. Izo turned the conversation toward the reason she had been driven out of the capital. He had held back from asking earlier, but now that she would be staying with them, it was better for everyone to understand the truth. Diana agreed. Then, with calm resolve, she prepared to explain the circumstances surrounding her family, the Amal household. The Amal household, a count's family, governed the region that included Camillo's town. Within that family line were 4 children, the eldest son Leon, the second son Karel, the third son Marius, and the daughter Diana. Under normal circumstances, the path of inheritance was clear. As the eldest son, Leon stood first in line to succeed the count. However, 1 month earlier, everything changed for the worse. A horde of monsters had appeared in a remote region, and in response, the count departed to subjugate them. Leon, as heir, accompanied him to fulfill their duty. But after the battle, both the count and Leon lost their lives. Worse still, the private army that had gone with them was also wiped out. When news of their deaths reached the capital, Marius immediately returned there. During his investigation, he uncovered several suspicious details surrounding the incident. For one, it had been reported that a powerful monster attacked them. However, there were no clear traces of such a beast. In addition, the wounds found on the bodies did not resemble injuries caused by horns or fangs. They were cuts. That meant the deaths may have been caused by human hands. If that was true, then suspicion naturally fell on the one who benefited most from their deaths, the second son, Karel. Izo quietly pressed for the meaning behind that. The truth was complicated. Karel was an illegitimate child. Because of that, he understood that any legitimate successor born through the count's lawful wife would stand above him in inheritance rights. After Leon's death, that next rightful heir would be Marius. Izo, Samiya, and Riku listened in silence as the pieces came together. Karel's mother had died shortly after giving birth to him. Out of pity, Diana's mother had raised him as one of their own, treating him equally with the others. Until this incident, Diana had known nothing of the deeper tensions within the family. But then reality changed. If the matter of succession was not resolved quickly, the family could lose its standing and court rank due to the absence of a ruling count. There was no time to delay. Diana quietly acknowledged that truth. At that moment, Izo reached a grim realization. The one seeking Diana's life was not an outsider. It was her own brother. Izo quietly reflected that even back then, Marius had seemed unusually sharp for an ordinary town guard. Now it all made sense. A man like that being the son of a count explained everything. After seeing the letter Marius had written to Camillo, Izo came to a decision. For the time being, Diana would stay under their protection. The sudden kindness clearly caught her off guard. He then told her that if there was anything she did not understand, she could ask Samiya or Riku. Both of them responded with open enthusiasm, ready to help however they could. Diana accepted their care with visible gratitude. Izo added one more thing. Being addressed formally all the time felt stiff and unnecessary. If she spoke to them more casually, it would likely be easier for everyone to get along. That suggestion surprised her at first. She tried to adjust herself on the spot, stumbling through the change before finally settling into it. Izo approved, and the atmosphere lightened enough for everyone to laugh together. From the very next day, their daily life changed slightly. The household moved through chores together. Diana was shown what to do, and they also warned her that going beyond certain trees could be dangerous. Soon after, Izo announced that he would begin work. Before leaving, he asked Samiya to look after Diana, and Samiya accepted without issue. However, what Izo expected and what happened were not the same. After offering to help, Diana ended up joining him at the workshop instead. Samiya then began teaching Diana the steps involved in weapon making. Watching the scene, Izo noticed that Samiya remembered the methods he had taught her surprisingly well. As for Diana, even though she came from nobility, she was stronger than expected. Riku pointed out that the previous day Diana had been swinging his sword around confidently, which suggested she already trusted her own ability. Later, when the workday ended, Izo called it there. He acknowledged Diana's effort on her first day. Diana then looked over the finished swords and quickly noticed the clear difference in quality between what they had made. Izo explained that the longsword was the standard model, while the short sword was the high-class model. Diana wanted to inspect it. Izo allowed it, though he mentioned that the handle had not been finished yet. She took the sword into her hands and stared at it with deep focus. Seeing that expression, Izo was reminded of Riku when they had first met. Diana found the sword remarkable. Riku quickly agreed, remembering how surprised she had been the first time she saw such craftsmanship. Diana understood the feeling well. Even in the capital, there were not many blacksmiths capable of making something of that level. Izo quietly reflected that he still knew little about the overall skill of blacksmiths in this world. However, if he limited himself to selling the high-class model, he could likely avoid standing out too much by passing it off as the work of a capable craftsman. Then Diana suddenly turned her attention to him and asked for a match. The request caught Izo off guard. A duel with him, and with swords at that. Diana made it clear that she was serious. At that moment, Izo realized something new about her. Diana had a taste for battle as well. She wanted to see him fight again, especially after witnessing the way he had fought when he rescued her. Izo understood immediately what she meant. Remembering that scene, he also realized there was not much else to do before nightfall. So he accepted, deciding they would have one match before it got dark. Diana was openly pleased by that answer. Izo could not help thinking that she was far from an ordinary noble lady. Soon after, the two prepared to spar. He questioned why she seemed so happy about it, especially since the blade she chose looked more serious than something meant for a casual match. Still, once both were ready, the duel began. Diana moved first, scraping her foot forward to gain momentum before lunging in with a fast strike. Izo blocked the attack cleanly. He answered with a counterattack, but Diana avoided it in time. From there, blades clashed again and again. They exchanged sharp, relentless strikes before both stepped back. Izo noticed that every movement she made was quick and accurate. She was not on the same level as Helen, but she clearly knew how to handle a sword. He tightened his grip. From the side, Samiya noticed that Izo had started taking the match more seriously. Then Diana tried to draw him with a feint. Izo answered with a side strike so clean and fast that he halted it just before it landed on her. The result was obvious. He regarded it as his victory, while Diana, breathing hard from the exchange, accepted the outcome. After the match, Izo admitted that moving his body that much had left him genuinely tired. Diana, however, could already tell something else. He had not been completely serious during the fight. Izo saw no reason to deny it. In his mind, they had only been sparring. It was never a life-or-death battle. Even so, Diana could not ignore the result. She had failed to land even a single clean blow on him. Izo still gave her credit. From his perspective, she had performed well. That answer only made the situation stranger to Diana. Someone known as the Rose of the Arena being described as merely doing pretty well was not something she expected to hear. Izo could only stare in confusion, wondering what title had just been dropped so casually. But then Samiya added her own comparison. Out of 100 fights against Izo, she had only managed to win once. This stunned Izo far more than anyone else. Diana was equally surprised. For a beast woman to say that made the statement even heavier. Samiya simply confirmed it. Then Riku added another piece of information. Izo was strong enough to take Helen's attacks head-on as if it were nothing. That comment made Izo rethink everything. He had believed Helen only gave him the minimum level of power needed for self-defense. Now he was no longer so sure. Diana immediately reacted to Helen's name. She knew exactly who that was. Helen was known as the Lightning Blade. Izo recognized the title. It sounded familiar, and he remembered hearing something like that before. Diana then pressed him further, wanting to know if he had truly endured Helen's attacks and remained standing. Izo casually recalled that they had fought for around 15 minutes. That answer shocked her again. To Diana, 15 minutes against Helen was no small matter. She explained that Helen earned the name Lightning Blade because of her overwhelming speed. That reputation had spread far beyond common fighters, making her famous even among the nobles. Izo quietly questioned whether Helen had truly been that strong. Even now, he was still surprised that he had come out of that encounter alive. Diana continued reflecting on Helen's reputation. For someone to face her head-on and even return blows of his own was no small thing. However, before she could finish that thought, Izo decided to end the discussion and suggested they head back home. But then something unexpected happened. Diana suddenly let her sword fall, dropped to her knees, and bowed deeply before him. The sight was strangely familiar to Izo by now. She asked to become his disciple. Izo was caught completely off guard. He glanced to the side and saw Samiya and Riku looking far too excited about the situation. In his mind, several facts rushed together at once. She was Marius's beloved younger sister, the daughter of a count, a young unmarried noblewoman who had been entrusted to him. And now she was kneeling on the ground in front of him. At this point, Izo could only conclude that prostrating oneself must be a normal custom in this world. After thinking it over, he accepted under one condition. If she was willing to practice once each day after work, then he would allow it. Diana's expression brightened immediately. However, Izo made something else clear. What he could offer was not proper swordsmanship. He was not skilled at teaching, and she would have to learn mostly through watching him. Diana accepted that without hesitation. Her mood lifted at once, while Riku and Samiya openly celebrated for her. Watching all of it, Izo quietly suspected that Diana had probably been quite a tomboy back at home. He then added one more rule: no calling him master and no overly formal behavior around him. Diana agreed. And just like that, Izo had taken in a second disciple, even if she was not a blacksmith apprentice. His daily responsibilities had quietly increased once again. From the next day onward, Diana helped in the workshop during the day. Then in the evenings, the two of them exchanged strikes using wooden practice swords. Diana had clearly received proper sword training. Her movements were agile, sharp, and fast. As for Izo, the only thing he could really offer through the self-taught style granted by his cheat was repeated sparring. Still, that alone could become a stepping stone for her growth. It was much the same as Riku's blacksmith training. By using Izo as a living standard, even if he could not properly teach them, both of them could build further on the foundations they already had. Izo felt certain that, in the end, it would become valuable experience for them both. Inside the house of Amal, Marius sat alone at rest and let out a heavy sigh. One name stayed in his thoughts: Karel. Personally, Marius had believed that after the funerals of their father and elder brother, Karel would naturally become the new head of the family. However, things had not gone that way. He remembered the moment Karel trembled with anger, unsteady and shaken. It was the first time Marius had ever seen him look like that. It happened shortly after objections were raised over the inheritance, followed by Karel leaving home in fury. After that, one strange event after another began surrounding Marius. Suspicious documents appeared, each one meant to damage his standing. Then came assassination attempts, carried out openly in broad daylight. If it had only been about himself, Marius believed he could have defended himself or proven the truth in time. However, Diana had now been dragged into it. That changed everything. And beyond even that, there was the incident from a few days earlier still hanging over the matter. To bring an end to the conflict, Marius knew he would need outside help. There was one person he could rely on, though he still wondered whether that man would accept such a request. With that thought, Marius began writing a letter. Later, deep within the forest, Izo was searching for something. He checked the area carefully, then turned his attention to a certain spot. Seeing no one nearby, he decided it was time. There was. As he stood there, Izo reflected that only a few days had passed since Diana arrived. When he had gone into town to sell his goods, he delivered Marius's letter to Camillo and explained the current situation. From there, the two of them discussed what should be done next. Apparently, Camillo had known about the trouble for quite some time already. He had hoped Izo would not become involved in it. But Izo saw things differently. Diana had already been entrusted to him. At that point, there was no keeping him out of it anymore. Camillo could only accept that truth. Izo then reminded him of something important. He owed Marius a debt. If Marius had any need for a blacksmith, Izo intended to do everything he could to help. Camillo understood. Because of that, they arranged a hidden place along the highway beside the forest where letters could be exchanged in secret. A few days later, Izo finally made contact with him. Izo was stunned the moment he read the contents of the letter. The message was direct. By tomorrow, he was to prepare everything needed for smithing and be ready to leave for the capital. Someone would be sent to collect him. There was no room for hesitation. Izo quickly informed Samiya, Riku, and Diana that he would be heading to the capital, while the three of them would remain at home. Riku's first concern was her smithing work. Izo told her to continue practicing as usual. He then checked whether she was comfortable handling the furnace on her own. She was ready for it. With the bellows and the materials stored in the warehouse, there should be no problems. Izo then reminded them that there was already plenty of food stocked up. They would be fine for a while. Samiya added that if supplies ran low, she could simply go hunting for more. Hearing that, Izo quietly felt that he truly had a dependable family around him. He entrusted the house to them with confidence. Diana, however, felt apologetic. In her eyes, Izo was involving himself in danger because of her household's conflict. Izo brushed that aside. He owed Marius a debt. This was simply his way of repaying it. That answer brought a smile to Diana's face. With the mood settled, Izo decided there was no point dwelling on it further. For now, they would focus on the day's work, and all three women agreed. The next day, along the highway, Izo spotted a carriage approaching. Camillo was riding it. The moment he arrived, he urged Izo to quickly get into the back. Once inside, Camillo apologized and explained that Izo would need to hide inside a box. Certain people could not be allowed to see him. Izo accepted that much, but the box itself looked far too small for a person to fit inside. Still, when he opened it, he was surprised. The bottom extended much deeper than the visible floor. It was cleverly built with a hidden compartment, designed to make the storage space appear smaller than it truly was. A simple trick. But in times like this, clever tricks were worth more than appearances. Izo was genuinely impressed by the hidden compartment. Camillo brushed it off as nothing more than a peddler's wisdom. After some time, while staying inside the box, Izo began hearing voices and movement outside. Judging by the length of the trip, they had traveled quite far while he had fallen asleep. The noise around them was growing louder now. Then he heard a firm voice allowing someone to pass before calling the next person forward. Izo guessed they had reached some kind of checkpoint for entering the capital. Outside, a guard questioned Camillo and identified him as a peddler. Camillo calmly confirmed it and explained that he had brought several goods with him. The guard then began an inspection. Inside the cramped box, Izo could only wait in silence. Tension quietly built as he listened to every sound. The guard checked the labels and determined the cargo to be cloth and spices. After that, permission was granted to proceed. Camillo thanked him, and the carriage moved on. Only then did Izo finally relax. They had clearly traveled some distance away from the checkpoint when the carriage came to a stop again. Camillo signaled that it was safe now and told Izo to come out. Once outside, Izo stretched his stiff body and admitted the ride had been rough. Camillo agreed and apologized for the inconvenience. Izo then looked around. At first glance, it resembled a smithy. A voice nearby confirmed it. This was the private smithy of the Amal household. Izo turned and saw Marius standing there. For a moment, the sight struck him. Seeing Marius in this setting made the noble side of him feel much more real. Marius explained that this was where weapons for their soldiers were made and repaired. Then he greeted Izo after such a long absence. Izo returned the greeting and, as he looked closer, recognized the short sword Marius was carrying. There was little time for reunion. Marius apologized for the sudden summons and went straight to the matter at hand. He wanted Izo to forge a sword for him, and to make it the finest blade possible. Izo did not object, but he needed to know the reason. Marius then revealed the problem. The Amal household possessed an heirloom sword, and a few days earlier it had been stolen. Marius wanted to know whether Izo understood the situation surrounding the Amal household. Izo confirmed that he had already heard much of it from Diana, Marius's younger sister. Marius then explained that, considering the circumstances of the theft, it was most likely an inside job. In his view, the heirloom sword had been taken by none other than his brother, Karel. Izo immediately questioned what that had to do with forging a sword. Marius laid out the scheme as he saw it. Karel's goal was likely to prove that anyone careless enough to lose the family heirloom was unfit to inherit the house. First, he would pretend to help search for the missing blade. Then, when the moment was right, he would stage its recovery himself and use that act to present himself as the most worthy successor. To Izo, the plan was so obvious that it almost felt insulting. However, that was where he came in. Marius explained that there was no time to recover the real sword from Karel. Since matters had reached this point, they would need another strategy. They intended to make it appear that the stolen heirloom had only been a fake. That idea caught Izo off guard. Marius made it plain. He wanted Izo to forge a new heirloom sword for the Amal household. Only then did the meaning fully sink in. A sword made by Izo would become the new treasure passed down through the Amal line. Marius confirmed exactly that. Izo quietly wondered whether Marius truly understood what he was asking. Marius then clarified his thinking. Though it was called an heirloom, the blade was not some divine relic or artifact made by elves. It was simply steel. Long ago, it had been granted to the Amal household by the king when their land was recognized as a county. It was said to have been forged by one of the greatest master smiths of that era. Izo fell silent, weighing the request. At that moment, Camillo stepped in and added his own opinion. He had already seen the sword Izo forged for Helen. In his eyes, very few human craftsmen could create something of that level. If Izo could make a blade like that, then he had nothing to fear. Still, Izo raised one serious problem. He had never seen the original heirloom sword. If he forged a replacement blindly, the new sword would naturally look different, and that difference alone could expose the entire plan. Marius explained that the heirloom sword had only ever been used during private ceremonies. Other than that, it was rarely brought out at all. In the family records, only its history had been written down. There were no detailed descriptions of its form or construction. Because of that, he believed differences in appearance would not become a serious problem. Izo stayed silent for a moment, thinking it over carefully. Then he accepted the request. Marius reacted with clear excitement and immediately thanked him. However, Izo stopped him there. He told Marius that there was no need to be so formal. He wanted him to speak casually, just like back when they first met in town. The current way of talking felt awkward. Marius, still carrying himself properly, could not agree so easily. In his eyes, he could not treat the man who was about to save his family with disrespect. Izo answered just as plainly. Thanks to Marius, he had been able to do business in town without trouble from the beginning. This was nothing more than returning that favor. Marius thought for a moment before offering another arrangement. With this task, Izo's debt would be considered repaid. From then on, they would deal with each other as equals. If that was the case, there would be no need for excessive politeness between them. Izo smiled and accepted immediately. Marius was satisfied and left the matter there. Even so, Izo quietly wondered whether it was truly acceptable for a blacksmith to speak so casually with the man who stood next in line to become a count. Still, it felt far better than the stiff exchange they had been having. Marius then returned to the real issue. If suspicion fell on them and exposure became unavoidable, there was still one simple answer. They would compare the swords directly. If the fake blade lost against the real one, then everyone would naturally conclude which sword had truly been bestowed by the king. Hearing that, Izo smiled to himself. This was the kind of thinking expected from someone raised to inherit a noble house. Marius then reminded him that time was short and asked him to begin at once. Izo agreed without delay. Then Izo steadied himself and prepared to begin. In his mind, this was no small request. He was about to do Marius a favor that could last a lifetime. The Amal household smithy was not built for magic use, so he had to start the firebed by hand. Still, alongside the magic knowledge installed into him, he also possessed the basic understanding of proper smithing work. He knew what had to be done. First, he struck iron on the anvil. After repeating the process many times, the metal gradually turned red-hot. Then he placed it with barley inside bark and lit it. After that, charcoal was added onto the firebed. Even the bellows here were operated by hand, so he worked them himself to bring the flames to life. Once the heat stabilized, Izo judged that things would be manageable. He usually relied on his magical bellows and magical firebed, so now he understood how much those tools had helped him focus entirely on crafting. Even so, he adapted quickly. From the prepared materials, he selected the finest-looking iron plate and began the real work. His eyes sharpened. Then the hammering started. As the rhythm continued, Izo noticed something felt slightly off. The sensation in his hands was different from normal. Perhaps it was because he was using another hammer. For a moment, he wondered if he should have brought his own. But he pushed that thought aside. This was a custom order. A blade meant to carry weight far beyond steel alone. He needed to concentrate more than ever. So he sharpened his focus further. Once the longsword shape was complete, he moved on to tempering it and strengthening the steel. After that came polishing, then sharpening. At last, the sword was finished. Izo looked down at the completed blade. Yet instead of satisfaction, he felt only dissatisfaction. Something about it was different from his usual work. Meanwhile, inside the workshop, Samiya quietly minded her own business while waiting for Izo to return. As the silence stretched on, a memory suddenly surfaced in her mind. She remembered the moment Izo said he would be back soon, and how he was counting on all of them. She also remembered calling out for him to return home safely. That small memory lingered longer than she expected. Samiya was clearly worried about Izo. However, nearby, Riku calmly pointed out that there was no need to worry so much because Izo would be fine. The sudden voice startled Samiya at once. She quickly tried to deny it and insisted that she was not worried at all. She attempted to explain herself, but then Diana gently stepped in and said it was only natural for Samiya to worry. Diana then apologized for dragging them into her family's troubles, and the guilt in her heart was hard to hide. Samiya immediately snapped back and denied being worried for Diana or anyone else. Even so, she admitted that Diana's family was clearly going through a difficult time. Samiya also said that while she did not understand human matters very well, she did understand one thing. Those people were deeply important to Diana. The moment those words settled in the room, Diana's eyes became teary. Seeing that, Samiya and Riku moved closer to her without hesitation, quietly trying to comfort her in their own way. It was a warm moment in the middle of uneasy times. Meanwhile, Izo was deep in thought at the smithy. He wondered why his work now felt different from usual. He believed the environment might be affecting him somehow. But then again, he had forged the same way as always and had not cut corners, so something still did not make sense. Not long after, Camillo arrived carrying a meal for Izo and asked whether he had finished already. Izo was still carefully inspecting the sword he had made. Camillo then wondered if something had gone wrong, because from the outside, the blade looked perfectly fine to him. Izo decided to test it. He used the sword to slice some vegetables, and to Camillo, the result looked incredibly sharp. However, Izo was not satisfied. To him, it was nowhere near a high-end product. He then pulled out his own knife for comparison. Using it on another set of vegetables, the blade passed through smoothly and cleanly with almost no resistance. Camillo was left stunned. Izo then concluded that, as expected, something was different. Camillo pointed out that the knife had not even made a sound while cutting. Izo explained that this was the true sharpness of the products he normally made. Hearing that, Camillo finally understood what Izo meant earlier. What stood before him was clearly not the work of any amateur. Izo concluded that this was how it was supposed to turn out, so he decided to try once more. Then Camillo asked what he planned to do with the blade. Izo casually told him that if Camillo wanted it, he could have it. Camillo was immediately pleased, however that joy quickly faded when Izo added that it would be at a bargain price. Camillo could only admit that Izo was a truly tough bladesmith. Izo then returned to his work without wasting time. After that, he created 2 new prototypes. Both turned out to be high-class products, yet something about them was different. He carefully observed each one. The first blade was shining more than the other. It was the one he had made without thinking too much. That detail caught Izo's attention. He wondered how he could make that same sparkle come out in his own products. But then he realized that was not the real answer. Without hesitation, he tossed the blade back into the fire, and later took it out again. He cut the knife metal into smaller pieces like bullets, wrapped them in thin cloth, and added straw ash over them. Then he heated everything in the flames until the separate parts became one single metal. If the materials from the 2 blades were not enough, then the answer was simple. He only needed to add more. And when adding more material, he chose raw metal that was as even and pure as possible. Then the folding began. He heated the steel until it bonded together, flattened the lump, folded it again, and repeated the same process over and over. Again and again. If this was repeated 15 times, the results would finally begin to appear. He then used magic to sharpen his senses and steady his nerves. That way, when stretching the material, the surface would remain even and clean. As he worked, Izo noticed something important. He no longer felt that strange discomfort while striking the metal. His rhythm had returned. Later, the product was complete. However, one final task remained. To make it worthy of becoming a family treasure, Izo needed to decorate it properly. According to Marius, this sword was an extremely important treasure. It was an heirloom from the founder of the Amal family, and a piece of the family's history itself. It was not as if Izo wanted to promote the making of fake heirlooms. More than that, he knew he had no right to fail here. He wanted to forge something strong enough to stand beside the original. After that, the rest would depend on the one who wielded it. This would become a sword passed down through generations. So at the very least, it needed to be worthy of standing beside such a name. Izo carefully ensured there would be no imbalance in the blade, so that the title of family sword would never fall into shame. Later, Izo finally realized that night had already fallen. He had been so completely focused on forging the sword that time had slipped away without notice. Now the blade was finished, and the decorations were complete as well. Izo had even added the sitting cat logo somewhere hidden on the weapon. A small secret mark. A quiet little Easter egg. After such a long day of work, he decided it was time to stop. There was no point in continuing without proper rest. The sword was done, and tomorrow would be for making the sheath. A day later, Marius held the finished sword in his hands, and he was left stunned by its appearance. To him, it was a truly beautiful weapon. Izo mentioned that the sheath had taken a long time to finish, but he had managed to complete it in time. Then, without wasting a moment, Marius stepped into a sword stance and began swinging the blade. Izo watched with quiet pride, while Camillo stood amazed at the sight of the sword being properly used. As Izo observed him, the movements looked very similar to Diana's sword style. That detail did not escape his eyes. He then asked Marius how the sword felt. Marius answered that it was amazing. To him, it was the finest sword he had ever held. Izo confidently replied that it was the best sword he could offer, so naturally it would be good. Marius then said that this weapon would make a perfect counterfeit family heirloom. After that, he firmly shook Izo's hand and thanked him. Marius then told Izo to rest for the day, saying he would come pick him up the next morning. Izo quietly wondered if that simply meant he would finally be dropped back home tomorrow. However, the next day told a very different story. The Amal brothers were now facing each other at the family table, with Izo standing beside Marius. At that moment, Izo realized Marius had never intended to bring him home at all. He had woken up early that morning fully prepared to leave. But then, without warning, Marius arrived with several ladies. They quickly stripped Izo down, dressed him for the occasion, and before he could properly process what was happening, he had been brought there like this. Then a respected man announced that he had been asked to serve as the judge for this matter. Once seated in that role, he declared that Corel had recovered the family sword that had been stolen. The stern old man was Duke Menzel. He was known to be a close friend of the former head of the Amal family, which gave his presence heavy weight in the room. Carell then stepped forward and proudly claimed that he had managed to recover the sword near the border the day before. Izo immediately recognized him. This was Carell, the brother of Marius and Diana, and the man who wished to become the next head of the family. Duke Menzel then stated that if this issue had truly been resolved, arrangements could be made for Marius to become the new head of the Amal family. However, Carell quickly objected. He argued that the family heirloom had been stolen while his brother Marius did nothing. Because of that failure, he insisted that Marius was not worthy of becoming the family head. Izo could feel the room tightening with tension. The real clash was beginning now. Duke Menzel admitted that Carell's statement carried a fair point. Then Marius requested permission to speak on the matter, and Duke Menzel allowed him to continue. Marius calmly revealed that he had done nothing because the family heirloom that had been stolen was only a fake. Carell was visibly shaken by that claim. Then Marius presented another sword and declared that this one was the real treasure. Carell immediately lost his composure and insisted that such a thing was impossible. Duke Menzel firmly ordered him to calm himself. The Duke then asked Marius how anyone was supposed to believe that this sword was genuine. In response, Marius took out a letter and presented it. He explained that it had been left behind by their father. According to Marius, the family had always used a fake sword during ceremonies and public occasions, while the true heirloom had been kept elsewhere in secret. Carell was stunned by the revelation. Marius then handed the letter to Duke Menzel and explained what was written inside. It stated that when the country faced a crisis, the rightful heir must take the family's heirloom and stand against that crisis. While reading the letter, Duke Menzel recognized at once that it was certainly the handwriting of the former Count Amal. Beside him, Carell looked deeply disappointed. Izo quietly observed the scene and realized they had handled everything properly. Then he glanced toward Camillo, who responded with a wink. In Izo's mind, he absolutely did not want Camillo winking at him. Still, he understood immediately that much of this had been Camillo's work. Marius then explained that their older brother had run away from the family before the truth was ever discovered. He said that he only met him again on that recent day. After revealing that, Marius apologized to Carell, admitting that he had been too late to tell him everything. Duke Menzel then asked Carell if he had any objections left. If there were none, he would report the matter directly to His Majesty. Carell, however, stood there trembling with anger. He insisted that he could not believe the sword he had recovered was fake. Izo quickly understood the meaning behind that reaction. Carell wanted a comparison. He wanted to test the blade Izo had made against the original one. And just as Izo realized it, Marius accepted the challenge and declared that he would prove it to Carell. Marius then turned to Duke Menzel and requested the use of his garden for a short while. The Duke calmly agreed. Later, outside in the mansion garden, a man prepared to perform a strength test using a spear against the two swords while everyone watched closely. The moment he struck the sword forged by Izo, the spear itself shattered. Duke Menzel immediately recognized what stood before him. He declared that this was surely the sword once granted to the Amal family by the king. It had not received even a single scratch. Before them was a weapon that carried both beauty and strength. Carell insisted that the result was ridiculous. However, Duke Menzel calmly declared that it was now time to test Carell's sword as well. Before that could happen, Marius stepped forward and said there was no need. He then raised his sword, brought it down in a clean slash against Carell's blade, and Carell's sword broke apart. Marius then declared that in strength, durability, and sharpness, he could guarantee that his sword was the authentic one. Duke Menzel immediately stated that there was no doubt remaining. He recognized it as the sword meant to rule upon the battlefield. Hearing that only made Carell even more furious. The Duke then announced that there was no longer any problem in this matter. The inheritance of the Amal family would proceed according to the rules, and he would personally report the outcome to His Majesty. At those words, Marius allowed himself a small smile of victory. Duke Menzel then asked if both sides were satisfied. But Carell suddenly fell silent. For a brief moment, the garden became still. Then, only seconds later, he screamed in madness and rushed straight toward Marius with a dagger in hand. Marius was already alert. In one swift move, he struck Carell with his sword. Carell cried out in pain, while Marius remained unaffected. Not long after, Marius knelt before Duke Menzel and apologized for dirtying the Duke's garden. He accepted any punishment the Duke wished to give. However, Duke Menzel said there was no need for that. Instead, he declared that Marius' punishment would be to avenge that thief using those beautiful swords of his. Then Duke Menzel addressed him as Lord Marius. Izo heard the word Lord and quietly wondered if that meant Marius had already been recognized as the new count. Duke Menzel then stated that now everything was finished, they should return inside. Marius glanced once at his brother Carell. His eyes became teary for a moment, but then he turned away and continued walking back into the mansion. And so, Marius successfully became the new head of the Amal family. Lord Menzel carefully arranged everything so that the incident caused by Corel would never reach the public. After that, Marius and Lord Menzel began discussing the family's future policies and what would come next. The news of Carol's death was never announced. Instead, word was spread that he had gone traveling around the world while assisting Marius from afar. Every necessary step was taken so that no one would grow suspicious of his disappearance. Meanwhile, his body was quietly taken away and buried in secret. As those matters settled, Izo found himself thinking about Diana. Inside the Amal mansion, two maids were quietly giggling behind him. Izo noticed and asked what amused them so much. One of the maids pointed out that Izo seemed to truly like the clothes he had worn before. Izo responded that he was just an ordinary old man from town, and besides, the outfit he wore now suited him better and even made him look cool. The maids cheerfully agreed at once. Then Camillo entered the room and praised Izo for the good work he had done back there. Izo replied that after witnessing everything that happened, he now knew he was not made for noble life at all. Even while saying that, he casually showed off his outfit. Marius and Camillo both agreed with amused expressions. Marius then sincerely wished to thank both Camillo and Izo for helping him through the entire matter. Camillo brushed it aside and said he had not done much. Marius admitted that he could not offer them a grand reward, since they already understood his current situation. Still, if there was anything he could do to show proper gratitude, he wanted to know. Camillo answered first. As long as Marius continued doing business with him, he would have no complaints. Business with a nobleman was excellent cover for many things. Marius then turned to Izo and asked what he desired. Izo said that he wanted information about rare ore. Marius asked if he meant something rare like mithril. Izo confirmed it. Marius then promised that whenever Izo needed such materials, he only had to pass word through Camillo, and Marius would see what he could do. After that, Marius handed something to Camillo and urged him to accept it without argument. Izo had no desire to take anything, however Marius' eyes were strangely persuasive. In the end, Izo decided to accept it. Marius then thanked him once more. And so, they left the Amal family estate with the plan of bringing Diana back to celebrate Marius' succession as the new count. Izo, meanwhile, was finally heading back to the Black Forest. After he and Camillo exchanged their goodbyes, Izo walked alone into the forest at night and made his way home. Even before he arrived, Samiya sensed that Izo was returning. Then Izo saw it. He had only been away from his house for a short time, yet he still missed it more than expected. As he approached, Samiya, Riku, and Diana came outside to greet him. Samiya welcomed him back. Riku welcomed him back as well. Diana also stepped forward and welcomed him home. Later, after Izo explained to Diana what had happened to Corel, sadness immediately fell over her. Memories began to return. Diana remembered that Corel had once been kind to everyone. When she was little, he used to play with her often. He had been good with their father, with Leon, and of course with Marius too. Diana broke into tears, unable to believe that it had come to this. The heirloom sword of the Amal family, the very sword Izo had made, was also the weapon that took Carol's life. After crying for some time, Diana apologized for shedding so many tears. Izo gently told her not to worry about it. He believed no one could hold back tears after learning that their brother had died, especially a brother they once got along with. And no matter what a person had done while alive, once death came, they were free from all of it. Izo then reminded Diana that her brother's death was being kept secret. Because of that, she needed to mourn now, before returning to the estate. He told her to grieve to her heart's content while she still could. Diana quietly thanked him. After that, Izo said he would take Diana to the estate the next morning, since he would also be attending the feast. Riku quickly understood what that meant. Izo would be gone again for another 2 or 3 days. Izo admitted she was right and apologized to Riku for leaving once more. Riku acted as if it did not matter to her, but she quickly pointed out that it certainly mattered to Samiya. Samiya immediately grew annoyed at Riku for saying that. Diana ended up laughing at their little exchange, and seeing her laugh like that made Izo quietly happy. The next day, they arrived at the estate. Izo informed Lady Diana that they had arrived. Diana reacted as if he was being overly formal, but her attention quickly shifted elsewhere. She saw her brother Marius waiting for her, then ran straight toward him and embraced him at once. Izo looked around and noticed that this time he could properly see the outside world. There were many different races gathered here. People with every kind of skin tone, dwarves, beastmen, and even lizardmen. Izo had never seen one before. Camillo then pointed out that there were some Melito around as well. He explained that the massive gate at the city entrance was proof of peace with the giant tribe, built by the old kings long ago. Izo accepted that information with casual interest. Then Izo began wondering if elves existed here too. Camillo explained that elves were usually self-sufficient, so they rarely left their forests. They only came out at times for supplies, making it very uncommon to see them nearby. Not long after, Marius approached and apologized for making them wait. Everything was moving quickly now. Marius was about to have an audience with the king, and he also needed to prepare a report regarding the succession. Izo noticed that Marius looked extremely tired. Later, inside the mansion, Izo relaxed and thought that he had nothing to do until tomorrow. However, someone soon knocked at the door. It was a servant, informing him that Lady Diana was calling for him and waiting in the garden. When Izo arrived there, Diana was already waiting with her sword in hand. He wondered if they still needed to do this even here. Diana, however, had already decided. She believed this might be their last training session, so they should begin immediately. Then their sparring began. Diana made the first move and struck without hesitation. As usual, Izo immediately went into a defensive stance and blocked the attack. Time passed with the sound of repeated clashes, until both Diana and Izo were left panting from the effort. Diana then urged Izo to spar with her seriously. She had noticed that he was only blocking every attack and never truly pressing her. Izo could hardly believe what he was hearing and wondered if she was serious. Diana answered him only with determined eyes. Seeing that resolve, Izo accepted it and decided there would be one final round. Both of them prepared again. Then, in a flash, Izo thrust his practice sword straight toward the side of Diana's face. The speed alone stunned her. She had not seen the move at all. After that, Izo told Diana that her skills had improved greatly over the past few days. If she continued training with discipline, she could aim as high as she wished. Diana was delighted to hear those words. She smiled and thanked him, and Izo quietly thought that this might be the last time he would ever see that smile from her. Later, Marius was accompanied by Diana as he went to report before His Majesty. At last, Marius would officially become the Count of Amal. Soon after, the hastily prepared feast was held with full grandeur. During the celebration, Marius raised a toast for the future prosperity of the Amal family and for the unchanging bond they shared with everyone present. In response, the hall erupted in loud cheers. Meanwhile, Izo remained off to the side, calmly thinking that he could probably cook some of the dishes being served there. He also wished Samiya and Wright could taste them. While lost in that thought, Diana approached and commented on how well his outfit suited him. Izo responded that his shoulders felt painfully stiff inside it. Then Izo told Diana that she looked truly beautiful in her red dress. Calling her the rose of the family felt completely fitting. Diana immediately blushed and reacted as if he was flattering her too much. Izo made it clear that he truly meant what he had said. The thought of seeing Diana for the last time had genuinely made him sad. Diana only giggled at that and reacted as if she doubted it. And while the two of them stood there in that warm moment, two men suddenly approached and called out to Diana, asking her to join them. Just like that, Izo was pushed to the side. Afterward, he never found another chance to speak with Diana again, and before he knew it, the feast had come to an end. Outside, as everyone prepared to leave, Izo told Marius to become a good lord. Then he quietly looked around, wondering whether Diana was nearby. However, he expected that she would be busy, considering she was the daughter of the count. Marius then brought up the fake sword. He explained that it had already been loaded into the carriage, and Izo was going to repair it. Izo wondered what Marius intended to do with such a thing. He asked whether it needed to be returned after the repairs were done. Marius told him no. Izo could keep it on Marius' behalf. Marius explained that it was because of the current circumstances, and they could not leave matters to chance or personal decisions. Izo understood and agreed to take good care of it. Marius then added that there was one more thing he wanted Izo to look after. It was inside the same box, and he would leave that matter to Izo as well. After that, they departed. Sometime later, after traveling for a while, they reached the entrance of the forest. Camillo reminded Izo to collect his luggage from behind that box. Izo walked over, opened the box, and finally looked inside. The moment the lid lifted, he froze in shock. There was a person inside. And to his complete disbelief, it was Diana all along, hidden in the box. She looked up at him with perfect timing and cheerfully revealed that she was there.